Thank you. Before we start the hearing today on the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development for Monday, February 7th, we ask that all members on the call please mute your phone. I understand that the state and current requires that the following announcements be made at the beginning of every meeting as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings at Council committees are included in the public hearing notice that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearing and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Will the clerk please call the roll and take attendance? Members that are here in attendance, please indicate that you are present by stating your name and saying aye. Mr. McMonagle, please call the roll.
Councilmember Dahlem.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues and everyone else attending.
Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Philadelphia.
Councilmember Jamie Gauthier.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues, and to all of the witnesses for today. Present.
Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones, Jr. Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Derek Green.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Councilmember Johnson, for this resolution and this important discussion this morning with today's witnesses.
Councilmember David O.
Thank you, Mr. McMonagle. A quorum of the committee is present and the hearing is now called to order. This is a public hearing in the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development regarding resolution number 210966. Will Mr. McMonagle please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 210966, authorizing hearings by the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development to examine diversity and inclusion in contracting by the city and related public sector agencies, including the School District of Philadelphia, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, and the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation.
Thank you. Before we start, I'd like just to say how important this hearing is and then thank Councilmember Johnson for the resolution, noting that we as a city and our agencies should lead by example. And it's important for us to be able to show others who we expect to do the same thing, that we are abiding by our rules and regulations, and also making every effort possible to make sure we have minority participation in all the things that we do. So, Councilmember Johnson, would you like to make a statement?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and colleagues, and most importantly, the panelists and witnesses, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to participate in this very important hearing. As we all know, Philadelphia is the poorest big city in the nation. It has been for years. A quarter of our residents are below the poverty line, but recent years have brought new prosperity to the city. The evidence is all around us. All you have to do is look up at the cranes in the skies. Hospitals, universities, labs, offices, and condos are sprouting up. The city's population is growing for the first time since the mid-1900s. In just a few years, we added $1 billion to the city budget. Unfortunately, this rising tide is not lifting all boats. Philadelphia's black poverty rate has more than doubled the white poverty rate. The Hispanic poverty rate is even higher. City government must treat this status quo as unacceptable, and it must lead the way in changing it. Right now, however, the city is not leading. Philadelphia's population is 44% black, but only 11.5% of city contracts go to black-owned businesses. Philadelphia's population of Hispanics is 15%, but only 3.5% of city contracts go to Hispanic-owned businesses. Even worse, those numbers haven't improved in recent years. In other words, the city is failing to use one of its most powerful economics tools, its spending power, to support disadvantaged Black and brown businesses. If anything, it's making the racial equity gap worse. Today is my goal to shed some light on this issue and begin to chart a path forward. I know that we can do better as a city. Let's get started today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. And before we begin the hearing testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that the public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and the viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for their questions or comments they have for the witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that there will be a use of the chat feature available on Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized in order to comply with the Sunshine Act. And the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Mr. McGonigal, would you please read the first panel for resolution number 210966?
Yes, can we please have Stephanie Tipton?
Good morning. If you're connected, just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Squilla, members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. My name is Stephanie Tipton. I am the city's Chief Administrative Officer. I'm joined this morning by the following representatives from core city departments that are engaged in supporting and advancing inclusive procurement throughout the city. So with me today, I have Nefertiri Sekou, the city's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Monique Neesmith-Joyner, the city's Procurement Commissioner, Kathy Padilla, the Deputy Director for Diversity and Inclusion at the Philadelphia International Airport, Don Somerville, Deputy Commerce Director for Business Development, and Karen Fegley, Deputy Commerce Director for Neighborhood and Small Business Development. I'm happy to be here today to provide testimony on Resolution 210966 regarding diversity and inclusion in contracting by the city and other related public sector agencies. Prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything we do is a hallmark of the Kenney administration, and this extends to our contracting practices. Each year, the city aims to reach a level of equitable inclusion on city contracts equal to the availability of minority, women, and disabled-owned business enterprises, or MWDSBEs, which is currently at 35%. The Office of Economic Opportunity, or OEO, is an office within the city's Department of Commerce and plays a lead role in ensuring the city addresses its goals for equity and inclusion of minority, women, and disabled-owned businesses in its contracting opportunities. OEO's mission is to ensure that the city is working with diverse businesses to fulfill its needs for goods and services and to promote and support the economic development of MWDSBE businesses. OEO carries out this mission by conducting outreach and registering MWDSBE businesses, reviewing and monitoring contracts, providing oversight on large contracts and projects, partnering with organizations across Philadelphia, and advocating for diverse businesses of all sizes. Despite facing unprecedented operational and financial challenges during the course of the pandemic, the City of Philadelphia's MWDSBE participation rate on contracts for FY20 and FY21 came in at just over 30%. While this is a slight decline from 36% achieved in FY19, OEO staff have worked hard to continue delivering on their work and their mission. OEO is one of the core departments that helps the city as a whole prioritize diversity and inclusion in the contracting process. As we look forward to the receipt of historic levels of funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA for short, the city is preparing to leverage those dollars to promote opportunity and build wealth based on a commitment to racial equity. This will require creativity and focus as we identify and address long-standing barriers that have inhibited MWDSBE businesses from working with the city and receiving the support they need to build capacity. We recognize the scale of opportunity that the Biden infrastructure legislation makes possible to increase participation and scale for MWDSBEs. We also know, however, that it is only by improving city processes, providing technical support, and growing the pool of MWDSBE partners able to work with the city and promoting a diverse workforce that we stand any chance of taking full advantage of the opportunity in front of us. With that goal in mind, a working group involving commerce, procurement, the airport, labor department, and Otis has been meeting regularly since last year to formulate recommendations to reform city processes and to devote resources towards making targeted and tangible improvements. My office, the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, or CAO for short, and the Procurement Department are also important partners promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in city contracting, leading efforts such as the Local Business Procurement Initiative, which aims to incentivize local, small, and diverse business participation on city contracts. In addition, our agencies have focused on improving the overall contract process, as well as streamlining the vendor payment process. For example, during the pandemic, the CAO, in collaboration with the Office of Innovation and Technology, or OIT, and the Finance Department, launched the Vendor Payment Portal, which provides vendors with greater access to information regarding their payments and invoices. To date, over 6,000 invoices have been paid using this streamlined process, and I'm happy to report that nearly 90% of all of our invoices are paid within 30 days. While improvements to the payment process benefit all vendors, we understand that payment delays are especially challenging for small and minority-owned businesses, and we're particularly focused on removing that obstacle. Diversity and inclusion in the city contracting process are critical to strengthening our local, small, and diverse businesses and helping our city and region recover from the economic impacts of COVID-19, as well as advancing racial equity in our community. Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to testify before you today. I, along with my colleagues who are available to answer questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your testimony. And real quick, and I know you said that OEO has been short-staffed, and hopefully we're looking to increase that staffing as we move forward. But as we work with the people who are doing the work and then counting or addressing the issues of participation, how do we ensure when we receive the numbers that those numbers that we're getting are accurate? Is there a process that we follow?
In terms of the numbers that are included in the reports that OEO issues?
No, the report we get from the contractors or developers saying their participation numbers. How do we
Right. So there's a number of things that are done to ensure that contractors are complying. First of all, OEO is a core partner with departments in ensuring that there's compliance with the participation ranges that are set within the contract itself. Procurement also works very closely with departments to ensure the compliance of contractors. In some cases, if there is a question around whether the information being provided is accurate, those matters do get referred to our Office of Inspector General, and we work closely with them to investigate any and all instances where fraud might have occurred as it relates to the information that's being provided by contractors.
Have we ever seen that or had that reviewed at any time?
Sure. I think Monique, our procurement commissioner, is on the line, and she can probably provide greater detail on some of the matters related to debarment that we've had more recently. So Monique, do you mind joining?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, we have seen instances where there were fraudulent reporting from primes, and we have addressed those issues. As Stephanie indicated, the Inspector General, oftentimes also our Chief Integrity Office is included, and we have gone through some proceedings with those matters.
And when we find that, as they are debarred, does that mean they're no longer able to get permits here in the city of Philadelphia?
What happens is there is a period, typically it's 3 years, where they are not allowed to participate on any new city projects. Depending on, let's just say if it were a large construction company and they have an active project that they're working on, we may allow them in some instances to continue with that project only, but they would not be eligible to bid on any new city projects for a period of 3 years.
Okay, thank you. I have some additional questions. I know Councilmember Johnson had some questions. Councilmember?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Stephanie, just a couple of questions. I know my other colleagues have some questions as well. This goes toward the 2020 disparity study, where it indicates that the city fell short of its 35% goal of contracting with disadvantaged businesses, only reaching 30%. And so I want to get an idea of an explanation of not reaching those targets, but also recommendations from that disparity study have we actually implemented? Because it seems like the numbers have been stagnated over several years. And so can you give me an overview from that aspect? And then also the status of actually hiring a person to run OEO.
Sure. So thanks for raising that question, council member. I mean, I think FY20 and FY21 were somewhat challenging years due to the pandemic, which really impacted some of the spending that we have seen with the city. So while there, in FY20 specifically, while there was a decrease in the overall proportion or percentage of spending with MWGSBEs, the overall, dollar amount that was spent did increase from FY19, but we recognize it's still, a lower proportion in comparison to the total spend. In FY21, while we haven't issued the annual report at this point, we do see that we're coming in around 31%. So there was a slight increase from the prior fiscal year. However, we saw a nearly $200 million decrease in the overall amount of contract spending in FY21, which really resulted in pretty historic lows in terms of the overall participation across all of our categories. We did see slight increases, though, which are promising in our public works category in FY21, and I think that's an area where we'll continue to see growth. Some of the things that can potentially impact that is, if we have contracts, if we have a greater portion of the contracts that we're doing that are federally funded, our local ordinances don't always apply. And so that can sometimes impact the participation on those contracts. But I think, the airport has done tremendous work, and they have a number of federally funded contracts, which I'm sure Kathy can also speak to. And so, that can also impact the participation depending on the mix of federally funded contracts that we have, or if we're seeking federal reimbursement in some cases. And then also, in terms of the availability, sometimes the availability of businesses and the types of business services or commodities they provide may not always correlate to the things that we may be purchasing in that particular, fiscal year generally. So I think those are some of the things that can impact it. I do think, as I mentioned in my testimony, that with sort of the historic investment that we are seeing from the federal government, we are really looking at ways to improve the participation and really leverage those dollars to increase capacity and wealth within Black and brown businesses here in the city. And Monique has been a tremendous partner with our Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability and Commerce and Airport on really looking at ways for us to improve processes to improve, overall access to our contracting opportunities by all businesses.
Could you just clarify, so are you saying that when there's a reduction in contracts, right, in terms of the number of contracts, that disadvantaged businesses are the ones who will be significantly impacted?
I'm not necessarily saying there's a one-for-one correlation there, but I think we did see probably some of the lowest amount of contracting spending overall for this last year. So I think FY20 and FY21 were challenging years in a lot of ways due to the pandemic and some of the transitions that are happening within OEO. And so I think we're committed looking forward on building back capacity within OEO, but then also using the IIJA dollars to leverage our ability to better increase access to our contracting opportunities. And so we have sort of right now to how we can leverage those dollars and really improve and grow participation in the next fiscal year.
Would you know the status of hiring the person that runs OEO, where we're at in that process, as well as
Sure.
hiring the person to run commerce as well?
Definitely. I'm going to turn that over to Dawn Somerville, who is a deputy in Commerce, and she can speak to some of the hiring that's happening currently.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, Councilman Johnson.
Good morning.
Currently, as Stephanie spoke to earlier in her testimony, we have engaged an advisory board to support the OEO team, the OEO staff. Currently, we are going through the process of hiring and looking for a new deputy director for OEO. The job has been posted. There is first rounds of review of CVs that we have received, and we're going through that process that's ongoing. In addition to that role, which is very important for the unit, is the importance of looking for new staff, because we do have some vacancies within OEO that must be filled. They are on the ground doing the work, and we need to have those positions filled as well. As it relates to the search for a commerce director, the administration is currently doing a search that's ongoing, and hopefully we'll have someone in both positions soon. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Steph, I just had another question that I'm going to wrap up. Well, one, it was good to hear that we're paying our invoices on time, and so I'm always getting phone calls regarding that particular area. So I do commend the administration for staying on top of that part, because that's another tricky way to put small businesses out of business if they can't make payroll. And so something I also want to zero in on, when you talk about supporting smaller businesses, do we reserve, right, any contractor opportunities specifically for Black and brown small, quote unquote, disadvantaged businesses? That would be the first question. And then the last question is, just from looking at the data, Rebuild, right, and PHDC, Rebuild outperform pretty much every city agency when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and contracting, right? And I think kudos to the mayor's team for making sure that has taken place, because that was a key concern when we signed off on the legislation. But PHDC has done the same. And so what are they doing differently, right, in terms of best practices that allow them to move forward and not us in other areas? And so those are two particular questions that I have.
Sure. I think we, in terms of, set-asides, if you will, for small businesses, we don't do set-asides necessarily. We do, goal setting on all of our contracts. One area that we have really honed in on through the local business purchasing initiative is how we can really streamline the process on some of our sort of initial on-ramps to being a prime. How can we make that process easier, especially for local, small, and diverse businesses? And so we spent a lot of effort over the last, 2 years at this point in streamlining not only the application process for businesses, but also the review and award process on the part of the city. And the purpose of that is really to incentivize us to do, more business with local and small businesses in particular. And I think, we have seen some increases there around spending, especially in small order purchases. So we're pleased with that. So that's one area. I mean, I think you highlight Rebuild, which has just done tremendous work. One of the programs that was pretty innovative that I think we want to look to is, potentially expanding across the city is the Emerging Vendors Program. And so that was really an intensive process where we provided capacity and support to businesses that may not already be certified, but over the course of a number of years can get their certification, but can participate on city contracts, and primes can get credit for working with them. And I think that has seen some really tremendous success, and something that I think looking across city government is something that we would want to expand as well. I can't speak specifically to PHBC, but I think those are just some areas that I think I would want to highlight in response to your question.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That's all I have. Chair.
Good morning, Council Member. One of the things that we've been working on with the airport with support from your office was particularly for Black and Hispanic owned businesses.
Yes.
We have filed a waiver with the FAA that would allow us to have a separate sub-goal for Black and Hispanic-owned businesses on our concessions. This is the first such a waiver that has been submitted for this, for the entire USDOT program, and we're very excited and hopeful that we'll receive a positive response. If we don't get a positive response, they're going to have to tell us what we need to do to correct the program. We will correct it and reapply.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for your hard work and your dedication and working with my office around this particular issue. I had this on my notes for my next round, but thank you. Chris Sample have also been reporting back on the national acknowledgement that you have received for your hard work and your dedication to addressing the issue of diversity and inclusion in contracts. So thank you and keep up the good work as well.
Thank you, Council Member.
You're welcome. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, for this round.
Thank you, Kenyatta. I know we have Councilmember Dom next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman Johnson, for this resolution. And good morning, Stephanie. I have 3 quick questions. One is, when you say we're paying on time, walk me through that process. If I'm a contractor and I submit a bill today, when can I expect payment by?
So according to our most recent data, approximately 86% of our vouchers are reviewed and approved in payment for under 30 days, and then another 25% of the vouchers are reviewed and approved for payment under 60 days. So one of the things that we launched during the pandemic, and I suppose this is maybe a silver lining with the pandemic, is that we launched the vendor payment portal, which really shifted the submission of invoices by contractors to an online portal. You may know, and I'm sure a lot of folks know, that pre-pandemic, many of our invoices, and still some of our invoices, are submitted by mail. They get mailed in, they might sit on someone's desk, they then get, a copy, they might get sent to finance for processing, and those delays and those handoffs can, obviously cause the invoice to get delayed in terms of payment. And so, we have about 6,000 invoices to date that have been processed through this new online process through the vendor payment portal. And I think because of that, a vendor can submit, they register for an account, they submit their invoice, an automatic email then goes with the invoice to the department. So directly by email goes to the department, and then they are able to process that electronically through the remainder of the process. So, the shuffling of paper and things like that is sort of eliminated. And I think because of that, we have seen improvements in our overall payment time for vendors. We would like more vendors to use the process, and we're encouraged by the number. We started slow, but we're encouraged by the number of invoices at this point that are getting paid through this process.
Is the payment percentages by the city, are they broken down by contractors, and which ones are minority contractors?
So I don't have that information. I can go back to my team and see if it's able to be disaggregated in that way. I think, as you know, we work with somewhat antiquated systems, so our reporting is not always the best or what we would like it to be, but I can certainly go back and see if we can do some of that for you.
Because whatever we can do, I know small businesses don't have a big cash float, basically. Right. So whatever we can do to speed it up would be helpful. The second question I have is, do we have any data that shows on the minority-owned businesses which ones are in Philadelphia versus which ones are not?
We do. I unfortunately don't have that data right at my fingertips, but yes, we do have a crosswalk between, minority-owned businesses and those that are local. We do have a process through the procurement department to certify businesses as local business entities. Depending on the type of contract, they can either get a preference on their bid by being a certified LBE, or, on professional services contract, they can access a more streamlined process up to $100,000. And the opportunity itself is only open to local businesses. So we've definitely seen an increase in businesses that have registered as LBEs. But if that is data you're looking for, we can certainly provide that following today's hearing.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm just curious how many of the businesses are in Philadelphia versus not, and what we can do to build, the volume in Philadelphia. And the last question really isn't a question. Well, it's a question, but it's for you. And in a perfect world, if you could say to us, there's 3 things we need to do to make this a whole lot better, what are those 3 things?
Sure. So I will always get on my soapbox for supporting our internal administrative offices. We saw them really impacted pretty significantly during the pandemic in terms of, not filling positions or, reducing staff. And, when we bring in investments like, the IIJA dollars, we also have to look at our internal capacity to support that money. And that's why I'm really, I'm pleased that as part of our, thinking with the IIJA dollars, we're also looking at internal capacity. So how many more staff do we need to actually, process and get contracts out the door? What do we need to do to provide greater capacity internally to our departments in order to do this properly? So, resourcing for staff is probably one area that I will always advocate for. And, it allows us, the ability to partner more closely with departments to get the work done and to do more sort of high value tasks like outreach and working with vendors when we do have the right complement of staff. The other thing I think is always a challenge is just access to capital. I think we have bonding requirements, we have insurance requirements, and, as we know, sometimes our payment processes can take some time, although we're doing better there. And so vendors being able to sort of have the adequate cash flow, the bonding capacity to really, access some of our opportunities. If I could wave a magic wand, that would definitely be an area as well that I would want to focus on. So that's two things, not three things, but I think those two things, if we could address those, could have a significant impact.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gaudier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Councilmember Johnson for this important conversation. Stephanie, I heard you talk earlier about the city having exceeded 30% for FY 20 and 21 in terms of minority and disadvantaged businesses who receive contracts. Do we break that down also by ethnicity in terms of Black and Brown businesses? And if so, what have we achieved there?
Sure, we do. I don't have the final reporting on that for the FY21 report because we're still working on it. But I do have, if you just give me a moment, we do have information, I believe, in the FY20 report. Sorry, if you just give me a moment, I will look that up for you. Apologies, I'm not seeing it right off the bat, but I can certainly, if you have a question, hopefully by the end of your next question, I can have that information for you. But we do have it broken down by ethnicity.
Okay, I think it's important for us to know that.
Good morning, member.
I'm sorry, Nefertiri, do you have it? Sorry,
yes,
we're kind of doing this by committee. So Nefertiri.
Yes. Hi, good morning. Nefertiri Siku, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer.
Hi.
30% of the 30%.
I can't hear Nefertiri.
Yeah, you broke up a
I don't
little
know if
bit.
that's just me.
17.6.
No, you're going in and out. So if you
I think I do. I think I do have it.
Got it.
Sorry, I apologize. So I do have it. So in FY20, the breakdown by contracts was 39% for African American businesses, 14% for Asian American, 12% for Hispanic American, 1% for Native American, and 34% for white female. And then for FY20, it was 47% of the spend that went to minority-owned businesses was with African American businesses, 15% Asian American, 9% Hispanic American, 1% Native American, and 27% to white female.
I think I was more so looking for the percentage in terms of total contracts. I asked you out of the 30%. What I think I meant was out of total contracts, how many, what was the percentage to Black owned businesses? What was the percentage to business owners who are Latino? Do we know that?
Understood. Yeah, we can get that. I don't have that data right here, but we can certainly provide it following the hearing. I have it broken down by the 30% that we spend, what proportion went to those businesses, but we can definitely get that for you.
Thank you. I get the sense that in certain areas, like construction, for example, but I'm sure this is the case in other areas, that we still find ourselves in a place where there's this conversation about there not being enough minority-owned businesses to really get us to where we want to be in terms of our goal. Like they're not being enough in the construction industry for us to spend as much as we'd like to. But this feels like a conversation that has stretched over years and years and years. So I'm wondering what proactively do we do to help particularly Black and Brown residents to start and grow businesses in these areas, so that at some point this conversation about not having enough businesses to contract with becomes null and void.
So I think I might have Kathy speak to this, because I do think that the airport has seen a tremendous success in this area. So, highlighting some of the work that they did, I think would be really good to share as part of this.
Hi. Some of the efforts that we've been initiating most recently are a micro business program for our concessions to help some of the smaller ones be able to get their foot in the airport and grow. We've looked at barriers to participation in some of our programs, and we've put in to the Airport Cooperative Research Program 2 study proposals, which were funded to the tune of $400,000 to look at how to better remove barriers within those federal regulations, and more generally for participation for firms in our projects. I mentioned our waiver application. Additionally, we also partner with Deatrice Isaac and I are co-chairs of the Chamber of Commerce Diverse Contracting Initiative, and that's sort of taking a global look at the region of barriers. What are the participation for all of the major players in the region? What are the impediments for firms being able to grow? And that's specifically focused on Black and Brown-owned businesses.
Thank you. I appreciate that the airport is doing some really innovative things, and that we've also seen success in areas of the city like Rebuild and with PHDC. Do we incorporate these strategies across the city as it relates to contracts, and what are our plans to proactively grow the amount of Black and Brown businesses with whom we can contract?
Sure. So, I think for us, I mentioned before, Rebuild's, emerging vendors program. There was a lot of, resourcing put behind, capacity building, and really growing businesses in order to have them participate in Rebuild programs. That will take an investment of resources to expand that citywide, but I think that is certainly a really promising program that we saw, tremendous success with Rebuild in terms of the participation. I think, the availability study that we did, does support that we could, that there is enough businesses available to do work. And, we did see a slight increase, about a 6% increase on participation on our public works contracts in FY21. And so, I think those are two areas where we know there's potential. And I think Karen also has some good work to share in terms of the, business supports that Commerce is generally providing to certain types of businesses. So I'll also have Karen speak to that as well.
Hi, everyone. Karen Fegley, Deputy Commerce Director. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we need to support businesses sort of holistically, and to really to grow Black and Brown businesses in our city, we have to hit them with, we talk about the 4 C's. So in this hearing in particular, we're talking about contracts as a real opportunity to grow businesses. But in order to get those contracts, Businesses need capacity, right? They need all the supports, all the back office functions and all of that. And so we have a number of programs. Commerce has always maintained a number of programs through our business technical assistance program. We fund a number of nonprofits in the city that provide those services. We talk about capital. They need access to capital. Otherwise, they can't hire people. They can't go after the contracts. And so we are working closely with the CDFIs in the city. Philly is really fortunate. I think we have 11 community development financial institutions. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is they've come together as this coalition. And, we're looking to support more funds into those organizations. As Commerce, we provide them with some operating dollars. So they get the lending dollars from banks and so forth. We give them the operating dollars so they have the staff to really do the hand-holding to help the businesses get loans. So contracts, capacity, capital, and connections. They also need, businesses need networks. This is, really how you do this stuff. So you get access to tips and tips and trades. I just want to mention too that last year we completed, in partnership with PIDC and United Way, the Philadelphia Equitable Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Assessment and Strategy. It is a mouthful, but it was really about just laying all of this out and figuring out how we can provide a continuum of services to help Black and brown businesses start and then help them grow, right? Because we actually have a lot of businesses starting, but we need more help getting them to grow. And so it's a way of bringing together all the partners in the city and helping us work together instead of, competing over little pots of money, but actually working together to bring in more dollars so we can really do a better job at that. Okay.
Thank you. 2 more questions, if that's okay. Do we ever penalize or hold accountable primes who repeatedly don't meet their goals?
Sure, we do. I might ask Monique just to speak a little bit about that, because I think procurement's done some great work in the area of vendor performance and managing that, and just how we hold vendors accountable. And just for your information, before Monique speaks, we do have an internal system called B2G Now that all departments have access to, that OEO also supports, that really is our mechanism for monitoring compliance. And so, we do rely on departments to do that. And so, I think also working closely with departments to build some of their capacity to managing that, and also, reporting issues to OEO and procurement is also important. So I'll have just Monique speak a little bit to, how we're holding contractors accountable. Sorry.
Yes, good. Good morning again. So to Stephanie's point, vendor performance is something that we pay very close attention to. We have a vendor performance process that is embedded on the procurement side, and it is where departments provide information about their experience over the course of a said contract term with the vendor. If there are some questionable performance issues, we work with the department in conjunction with OEO and any other partner agency that needs to be involved, and work with the department to work with that vendor to either bring up their performance standard, whatever that may be, and or support them in reaching their goal. If they've had an issue or a setback with their minority woman or disabled on business partner, then we work with OEO to seek additional resourcing for them. OEO, if it is in fact, a vendor that they are very familiar with, they do outreach to that minority vendor as well to see, if there are capacity issues or if there are things that the city can support them in or just walk them through to ensure that they don't fall behind. So we do definitely keep the primes accountable and work with the departments on professional services as well as procurements.
Thank you. And then lastly, Stephanie, I think I heard you mention that when we get federal funding, sometimes the federal government's goals are different than ours, which impedes our ability to reach more ambitious goals. Are we having a conversation with, or do we need to have a conversation with anyone at the federal level about that, since we expect to be receiving, many more federal funds?
Kathy, do you want to speak a little bit to that? Because I know that comes up quite a bit at the airport.
Thank you. Yes. So there are different ways that those funds devolve through to the city agencies. The airport is a direct recipient like SEPTA and PennDOT. So we have full responsibility for our own goal setting on those projects and for the achievements. Some of the other city agencies, such as Otis, Streets, Public Property, are sub-recipients most usually, and they have to follow the programs that are set up by the direct recipient agencies. For streets, most of those would flow through PennDOT, and the PennDOT goal applies. So having those conversations would probably start with PennDOT for sub-recipient agencies. For airport direct funded recipient projects, it would start with me.
Okay. Are we in active conversation about there needing to be changes on the goals set on the contracts that are coming to the city and where we are a subrecipient?
I know that the working group that Stephanie mentioned earlier is looking at some of those issues. I think it gets pretty complicated because if you're a subrecipient through PennDOT, they can't have a separate goal regionally. They have to have a statewide goal. And that's what's going to apply to your contract level goals. So it's not going to be an easy lift. At the airport, just to give an example of what the different goals are, our OEO goal for the department is 30%. We achieved 36% this year so far. Our DBE under the federal program goal is 17.9%. We're at about that so far this year. Our ACDB concessions federal goal is 21%. We're achieving about 44% so far this year.
Okay. Thank you so much. No more questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, I want to thank Councilmember Johnson for having this conversation. Number of people on this call I've worked very closely with. Ms. Tipton, I just want to echo your comment about access to credit. That's one of the big issues that I've seen historically, that from a public sector, we haven't done what we need to do to provide some better access to credit and use public dollars as a way to address that issue in our city. That was really the motivation of my public banking initiative legislation. In fact, I was just talking to a African-American CEO 2 weeks ago who has a contract with the city, and he has not been paid by the city, even though he's been providing the services under this contract since October, has not been paid. There's been an issue within the revenue department, which we hope has now been resolved. But because he was in that delay between providing the goods and services for one department, not being paid by a different department, he went to his bank, which he's had a 17-year relationship, and asked for an increase on his line of credit to help him with his cash flow. He's never had delinquencies. He doesn't have any tax issues, but they declined his increase. In fact, the banker he was working with was concerned that based on the scoring he received on a denial, he felt we need to remove that application because they may mess with his current line of credit. And so he was at some point looking to go to an alternative financing entity just to get the dollars he needed to cover the cash flow for a contract he has with the city, but not being paid. So the reason why access to credit is a very important issue is because it's one of the things that's hurting so many of the Black and brown businesses in our city. And Ms. Tipton, I wanted to get some perspective on where are we regarding local business purchasing initiative and best value, and how those initiatives are helping to address the issues that Councilmember Johnson's raised through this hearing.
Sure. I will have Monique speak some to that. Hi, Monique.
Yep, good afternoon. I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say good afternoon, but good morning again. So I'll speak to best value first. Best value has been a substantial vehicle for the city of Philadelphia in my 3 years in the seat. There are requirements for participation goals and local goals to be set on all best values. It is a point in the justification document prior to a best value even being let out on the street. So I do review that intensely. The justification document comes to me. If I have questions, I definitely work back and forth with the department and OEO in particular to ensure that the goals are appropriate, that everything has gone through OEO and that the ranges have been set appropriately, as well as the local participation goal. So we have certainly seen minority, women, and disabled owned spend, as well as a significant amount of local spend through best value. So we do have data for that. In terms of LBPI, what we've done with LBPI through the guidance document and the regulation that was put forth is there is a requirement for solicitation of minority, women, and minority, disabled, and small businesses, as well as LGBTQ businesses for each solicitation at each level. At the micro purchase level, which is below $35,000, the SOP level, which is between $35,000 and $78,000, and then that local set aside is from $78,000 to $103,000. So there are requirements for each category.
So as a follow-up to that information, Ms. Nesbitt Joyner, if you could provide an update to the committee regarding where we are regarding LBI and best value, I think it's very important. I guess as I'm thinking about the witnesses here, and I know we have both Kathy Padilla from the airport as well as Leslie Richards, and we are now looking on implementation regarding the infrastructure bill and how we can provide that as a vehicle, that $1 trillion bill, and providing opportunities for businesses in the city of Philadelphia, especially Black and brown businesses. I guess one of my real concerns, and this will be an unfair question, but this is why we're in this situation and why we have hearings to get information, even though they may be challenging. We have a 44% African American population, but only 6% of the businesses with employees are owned by African Americans. We have a 15% Latinx population, but only 4% of businesses that are owned by people from the Latin diaspora are businesses with employees in the city. And so the question for those business owners, and when they look at the infrastructure bill and they look at the fact, and I think Ms. Tipton, you gave some perspective on reductions in spending regarding Black and brown businesses in the city of Philadelphia, what type of assurance can we really give them that they will be really able to participate in these programs and these initiatives? This is a conversation I've been having with some of my colleagues in the National League of Cities and some other organizations around the country, that for our constituents who look at, well, thank you, Councilmember Green, for pushing for the infrastructure bill, but how am I going to participate when issues like the situation I just talked about earlier keep happening? And so I want you to answer that question. And so how would I give that perspective when the track record, even more recently, has not been favorable in reference to spend with Black and brown businesses?
So one of the things we've been doing a number of things, and there are a couple committees that are focused specifically. One is specifically focused on workforce diversity as well as supplier diversity. And in those committees, we're having conversation about looking at surveys, looking at feedback that we have obtained through a number of different vehicles and engagement with that vendor community to understand what the challenges are from their perspective. And we're looking at what practices, what improvements have we made, right? And how can we champion those improvements? How can we let this vendor community know that the city of Philadelphia is still very open to welcoming Black and brown businesses in, and that we are preparing ourselves to prepare these businesses to come in and take advantage of these and access these contract opportunities through IIJA. We're also looking and working very closely with the Rebuild. Rebuild initially was not a part of our work group, but we have since welcomed them in so that we can learn specifically about the Emerging Vendors Program. How can we utilize that program as a pipeline to bring the vendors? I believe it's 45 or so vendors in the Emerging Vendor Program, and I think they're 90, and I may be flipping the numbers of vendors that are in the Rebuild Ready. But how can we utilize both of those initiatives as a pipeline to bring these same Black and brown businesses into, into the fold? Many of these businesses are small construction firms that are working on playgrounds, all of the rebuild projects. So how can we, again, bring them in? How can we provide them with the additional assistance? How can, for those who are in the Rebuild Ready program, how can we get them, that access to capital? What can we do? We're looking at what other cities have done. Other programs that other cities, Kansas City in particular, have done to create access to capital. And how can we bring that idea to the city, to the administration, to create a program, if you will, for Black and brown businesses who have difficulty gaining access to capital. So on the workforce side, again, we're also working with Philadelphia Works to identify apprenticeship programs, to identify what populations would best fit into those programs in terms of, or should we be working with the school district to bring high school students in? Should we be looking at some of the technical institutes and beginning to partner with them to prepare their upcoming graduates to come into the workforce and, again, gain gainful employment based on these incoming IIJA dollars. And then how can we're also very focused on making this sustainable. We don't want this to go away in 5 years when IIJA goes away, but how can we create sustainable programs?
Madam Procurement Commissioner, thank you for that work and that background information. And I commend the work that you do. I commend the work that Ms. Tipton's done, as well as Karen Fagley, have worked with all of you. But I have a question. When was the last time any of you met with the mayor regarding these issues?
We actually just had a economic opportunity meeting. I want to say it was in December. Where we did review some data that was hard to swallow, I'll be honest, for us as well as for the mayor. So we do have his attention there. Nefertari, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
And prior to December, when was the last time? Is that, you said the Economic Opportunity Cabinet. And so prior to December, when was the last time you met?
It's a quarterly. It is a quarterly meeting. So it's every 3 months.
Every 3 months with the mayor?
Yes, with the mayor or his designee.
With the mayor or his designee?
Yes.
It's with the mayor.
Okay.
Green. I'm sorry, Councilmember Green. It's with the mayor. We have a quarterly economic opportunity review committee, and the mayor attends. This is something that we established going forward because we need the mayor there, and the mayor is glad, to attend in terms of really getting the support to leverage this work within city government and across city government. So having the mayor's presence and his ear and support, and he's completely engaged in this work. The one thing that I would add on to what Stephanie and Monique shared about some of the barriers is also helping businesses be able to navigate the procurement process. And so when we see these and we anticipate these dollars, without the federal dollars, I think it can be complicated and complex in navigating the procurement processes. And so now that we're going to have an influx of dollars, we also need to make sure that the businesses receive the information, can respond to it, and bid competitively competitively, even for those businesses who are smaller and don't have all of that back office support. So that's another key area that we need to attend to make sure that these funds are received and taken advantage of by diverse business owners.
Well, I want to thank you for that response, to provide information. I guess from my perspective, having, fought for additional dollars for commerce, when you think about the pandemic was a global health emergency, it was also an economic crisis, and a number of Black and brown businesses that closed disproportionately to majority-owned businesses, and the Commerce Department's budget was basically drastically reduced. Ms. Bagley talked about the CDFI network, and when I see other counties like Erie, Montgomery County, and other counties around the Commonwealth, and I know this through my role as past president of Pennsylvania Municipal League, and those counties put significantly more dollars into their budgets to help small businesses, and we really basically had to beg to get that done at the City of Philadelphia. It just really creates a concern, especially in how we're providing resources for Black and brown businesses when we have such a small percentage of businesses that are owned by individuals from those communities with employees. So if we're ever going to address the 25% poverty issue or address the 562 homicides we've had in the City of Philadelphia, all these issues are interconnected. And unless we're going to make a real commitment and prioritization to growing Black and brown businesses and not do things in silos, we're going to continue to have these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson, for this very important hearing. And particularly, I wanted to focus on a couple things, starting with the local business preference, local bidding preference initiative, which was legislation that I had worked on as a legislative aide, working under Councilmember Blondell Reynolds Brown. And so, Commissioner Nesmith Joyner, you had talked about the preference related to the micro purchasing, which is under $35,000, SOP 35,000 to 78,000, and local 78 to 103,000. I remember for a specific category years ago, there was a list of minority vendors that the city could choose from. I think it was relative to landscaping or another industry. Are you familiar with the list that I'm referring to? And does that still exist?
So I think you may be referring to the registry, the OEO registry.
And
which
it's for
lists minority women and disabled owned businesses. Yes, that still exists.
It still exists. Okay, and what's the bid amount for contracts where you would just reach out to that particular registry or group?
So that's required for across all contract amounts. There's no, we don't have a floor or a ceiling, to be honest. You're supposed to solicit businesses from each category for all contract amounts.
Yes.
And can I just also just add there? I mean, one thing, we had a similar requirement previously. One of the things that we did do in the last year was OEO is actually now an approver of the contract. So before the contract can even be awarded, OEO reviews to confirm that a solicitation happened and that it satisfies that requirement. So, we kind of were a little bit on the honor system with departments, I think, previously, but now having that sort of extra compliance focus with OEO in the workflow, we now can actually verify and can hold the contract from moving forward if that hasn't been met on the contract. Right.
Okay. So you've added an additional layer specifically for department heads before they can move on in the process, because I think the overall concern is that at the end of the day, OEO and procurement can do their part, but it's ultimately up to each individual department to go through their specific contracts. And I think that's where, we hit all of the hiccups, because typically they're going to legacy vendors and legacy contracts, which leads me into my next question relative to the infrastructure package. We just had a briefing with Congressman Evans and our workforce development providers. You all know that I've really worked with our Commerce Department in ensuring that we have a workforce development unit after the department was eliminated after the COVID cuts. And we've worked closely with PhilaWorks and others just to try to prepare our providers and our businesses for the impending infrastructure dollars that will be coming to the city of Philadelphia. And so my concern is when we were at the onset of COVID-19 and we were dealing with an influx of federal dollars, that some of in particular, the health dollars, related to the actual pandemic, were given to what we would call legacy vendors, without a real process for other businesses to be involved, as determined by that specific department. So what will be different this time around from an OEO and a city contracting perspective to ensure that we are offering these opportunities to everyone and not just legacy vendors?
So thank you for that question. Even in COVID, we did realize that, to your point, legacy vendors were being solicited and provided with opportunities that were not available to all vendors. So what we did was we put a process in place by which no emergent contract, at that time there was a declaration, an emergency declaration in place. So we had an emergent contracting process. And what we did was we unfortunately had to add a layer where no emergent contract will go forth without review from myself, my colleagues in the law department, colleagues in our contract legislation unit, as well as OEO. And we would review all of the scope of work. And what the ask was, in some instances, OEO would identify minority, women, or disabled-owned businesses that could participate. We also made an effort to research if local businesses could participate, and those contracts would not move forward. We were the secondary level of approval in that process, and the contracts would not move forward until we were satisfied. So we've embedded that, as Stephanie mentioned, into our normal process now on the professional services side, and we also have those processes embedded over for procurement.
If I may, as a department, we've held a number of outreach events this year and the year before, specifically targeting certified firms that are not working on our projects.
Kathleen,
yes.
Kathleen, before you speak, just state your name for the record for the transcription.
Thank you. Kathleen Padilla, and I'm the Deputy Director of Aviation for Diversity and Inclusion. And if I could just reiterate what I said, we've had numerous outreach events, small business roundtables, including our capital development chief, to outreach to firms that have not worked at the airport previously, specifically.
Okay, thank you for that response. I just wanted to go back, Commissioner Nesmith, Joyner, relative to what you call that second layer of review, specifically from procurement. Again, my concern is that we could be in a circumstance where when the infrastructure dollars technically hit Philadelphia, we could still technically be under the COVID emergency. So that is something that we have to think about as we move forward in the process, in addition to that second level of review. There needs to be something else put in place for each of the departments, maybe a checkoff list or something that we can do on our side to ensure that an overall review has happened, and not just looking at a list of legacy vendors, which is why I asked the question at the beginning, because I know there was a list that existed somewhere for a specific industry. It could have been landscaping or others, as long as the contract, or it could have been paper and supplies, but as long as the contract was under a certain amount, they looked at just the list of minority vendors that could supply that particular need. So again, I'll move forward and I'll follow up with some additional questions I have on that. But I'll move forward to my last question, because I heard you bring up workforce and supplier diversity and workforce development. And I think one thing that I'm hearing from business owners that I'm speaking to is that they want to know there's a highly skilled workforce out there for them in order for them to adequately operate their businesses here in Philadelphia. And that's outside of those who are sole proprietors, which we know is another challenge. So you mentioned apprenticeships. And so what are we doing from a city perspective to offer an apprenticeship style opportunity to small, local, and minority business owners so that they could increase their scale and ability to do business with the city? Separate from the work we know that is ongoing with the school district, of which I am continuing to work with them on, ensuring that we're looking at the labor market forecast and aligning some of our CTE programs to the life sciences industry and some of the jobs we know that are coming to Philadelphia. But what are we doing from a city side to provide an apprenticeship style program for small and local minority businesses?
I would have to ask Commerce to step in. My knowledge base around it is what we're doing and thinking of specifically as it relates to IIJA, but that is not my wheelhouse. And I'm not sure that I know Heloise Hughes oversees workforce in the city, and I'm not sure that she's on this call.
Hi, everyone. Karen Fegley again. From Commerce Department. Right. Heloise Jettison is not, she's actually, I believe, listening in, but we don't have her dialed into the call to speak today. She and all of us in, Commerce leadership have been involved in these meetings and are certainly in the planning stages of taking existing programs we have to the next level to support exactly what you're talking about. But I'll have to get back to you on those detailed plans as they're coming together.
Okay, well, I look forward. How are you, Karen? I look forward to continuing to work with the Commerce Department on ensuring that we are doing all we can to bring more businesses into the fold, but also helping them navigate the thorny waters of doing business with the city and the arduous, procurement process that we have in place. Those are all what we call barriers to local and minority businesses even wanting to get into the arena. So we have to ensure that we are eliminating those barriers so that we can have more minority businesses in the fold, which I know will help us hire more minority Philadelphians into these roles at these said businesses. Therefore helping all of the other challenges we know that we face here in the city of Philadelphia. And Kathleen, I did not want to leave this call without acknowledging you and the work down at the airport. I will say that I know you all are doing all you can to try to increase minority participation, but we all still have a lot of work to do. I still hear from minority vendors that just want to have an opportunity, are concerned about the selection of organizations that are not here or located or based in the city of Philadelphia for some of the work, particularly down at the airport. So I know we all will continue to work together to do all we can to ensure we have more local and minority businesses in the fold at all of the city agencies and not just one. So thank you very, very much. Thank you for the opportunity. And lastly, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank all the departments for responding to the in-depth questions I had after the last budget cycle. We did receive the report back. It's over 1,000 pages. So it's taken us some time to get through it, but I will tell you this. When I asked for the breakdown of specifically Black-owned businesses or Black female-owned businesses, a lot of the categories within that 1,000-page report that I received back from all of your departments was zero. So we say minority, and in a city like Philadelphia, where we're 44% African American, and we're using the word minority, is typically not African Americans who are receiving these opportunities, whether they are male or female. A lot of those categories have straight zeros all the way down. And I look forward to discussing that with all of you in the budget process, because it's 1,000 pages of the report. It has taken us some time to get through it, but some of those numbers are abysmal. And I just wanted to leave each and every one of you with that. So have a good day, Mr. Chair. I look forward to continuing this conversation. And again, thank you to my colleague, Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson, for all of your work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate that. Since there's any additional questions, Mr. McMonagle, can you please call the second panel for Resolution 210966?
Yes, can we please have Leslie Richards, Andy Abdullah, Stephen Zook, Eric Watkins, and Ann Bouvard Nevins all teed up, please?
Good morning. If you're all connected, thank you for being here. Just as you start as called, just state your name for the record and then proceed. I guess we'll start first with Leslie.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity, and I've enjoyed the conversation so far. So good morning, Chairman Squilla, Vice Chairman Dom, members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. I want to thank Transportation Chairman Kenyatta Johnson for bringing this resolution to our attention today. And I am Leslie Richards, the CEO and General Manager of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, SEPTA. And I'm pleased to be joined by SEPTA Assistant General Manager for Procurement, Supply Chain, and Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, Andy Abdallah. Thank you for holding this hearing for the chance to provide an overview of SEPTA's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and our efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our procurement activities. As PennDOT Secretary in 2018, we conducted a study to measure disparities between the participation and availability of minority and women-owned businesses in PennDOT contracts. Results of this study helped to produce recommendations and action items that have benefited the transportation industry in Pennsylvania and helped to inform diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that we have advanced here during my tenure as SEPTA's CEO. In fact, many of you already know because I worked with many of you on that. We borrowed from SEPTA, and now SEPTA's borrowing from PennDOT as well, and we worked well together on this goal. SEPTA's board and leadership share the city's goal of achieving an equitable and inclusive recovery, and we are committed to expanding business opportunities for local Black, Brown, small disadvantaged, minority, and women-owned companies. Following the passage of Pennsylvania Act 89 of 2013, the SEPTA board expanded federal DBE goals and procedures to include all SEPTA procurements greater than $100,000. This is regardless of funding source, and is able to grow opportunities for small and disadvantaged businesses to benefit from the new state funding law. In response to the coronavirus pandemic, SEPTA joined the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia's Recharge and Recover Task Force, and we continue to share our best practices with other business leaders who are committed to increasing procurement opportunities with diverse businesses. Now with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last fall, SEPTA is taking a leading role in helping to launch the Equity and Infrastructure Program. It's a new national effort to grow and strengthen historically underutilized business participation in infrastructure. Thanks to the efforts of our regional congressional delegation to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, SEPTA expects to receive more than $100 million in additional federal formula funding in each of the next 5 years. These funds will help SEPTA address some of our most pressing infrastructure rehabilitation and vehicle replacement needs, and we are eager to put these investments to work for our customers and the communities we serve. Beyond rebuilding the assets that support SEPTA's mobility mission, we know that transit investments transcend concrete and steel. Our projects connect people to opportunity, build vibrant communities, and have a cascading impact on the local, regional, and state economy. If invested strategically and equitably, funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill can serve as a catalyst for new and transformative opportunities for disadvantaged minority and women-owned businesses. Contracting is an opportunity to invest in our community. Who we hire to supply goods and services and fulfill construction contracts is a reflection not just of our programmatic needs, but of our values. SEPTA takes this responsibility seriously, and we value our important role in promoting broader and equitable economic opportunities. To put this commitment into practice, I'm very pleased to share with all of you that SEPTA will be one of 5 charter signatories to the Equity and Infrastructure Program. This is an exciting new national initiative that will strengthen the transportation industry's commitment to contracting with historically underutilized businesses, creating new pathways for businesses to grow and build their communities. Following the passage of the IIJA, I was honored to join Phil Washington, the former LA Metro CEO, who now runs Denver International Airport, and leaders from the Chicago Transit Authority, Port of Long Beach, and Metropolitan Water District of Southern California in working to launch the Equity and Infrastructure Program. We'll develop a set of principles and industry best practices and guide how we contract on major infrastructure projects going forward. Again, I can't stress how honored we are to be this group of first 5 signatories and in working and putting together the language and the goals of this program. The goal I'm most excited about is increasing the number, size, and percentage of historically underutilized businesses growing to primes, joint ventures, or equity participants. The Equity and Infrastructure Program will provide guidance and industry best practices for public agencies, including streamlining the administration of programs for firms included in the historically underutilized business designation, working to increase the amount and type of financing available to historically underutilized businesses to meet infrastructure contract requirements and insurance. That is how we'll maximize infrastructure investments to fully deliver to our communities. In support of Equity and Infrastructure Program, SEPTA is convening an internal working group to increase the number, size, and scope of small and disadvantaged business contracts awarded. We plan to establish a small business set-aside program and the goal of increasing the number of prime contracting opportunities. One approach we plan to explore is subdividing contracts wherever possible to facilitate the scaled growth of historically underutilized businesses, including existing DBE firms in our current program. Another primary goal of this initiative for SEPTA will be to engage more small businesses in the large projects we have planned, like trolley modernization. I believe that our applications for federal grants will be more competitive when we demonstrate that we have diverse business partners working together to advance these projects of regional significance. The Equity and Infrastructure Program has the support of the SEPTA board, and Chairman Dion will be joining me in signing the pledge. I look forward to working with my colleagues here on this panel and across the Commonwealth to build this program into a new industry standard. While we pursue these initiatives, I'm pleased to report continued progress in strengthening our existing Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and fulfilling our commitment to provide greater opportunities for small minority and women-owned businesses to participate in SEPTA's capital program. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce Andy Abdallah. Andy and his team are responsible for all procurement activity at SEPTA, and he'll provide an overview of SEPTA's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and update you on our current efforts. Andy?
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, Chairman Squella, Vice Chairman Dom, and committee members. SEPTA, as a recipient of federal funding through the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, SEPTA complies fully with the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise DBE program. The Federal DBE program is unique both in its structure and reporting requirements. Small minority and women-owned businesses seeking to participate in SEPTA contracts as a federal DBE must first apply for DBE certification, and SEPTA follows a rigorous and public Federal Transit Administration process for establishing DBE participation goals on its solicitations for goods, services, and construction projects. SEPTA is one of only 5 agencies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that still certifies firms as DBEs. Today, there are 2,328 registered DBEs in the Pennsylvania Unified Certification Program, PA-UCP, DBE directory, of which 248 are based in Philadelphia. We continually look for ways to grow our program of potential business partners and work very hard to educate businesses about the DBE certification process, as well as registering to do business with SEPTA through our e-procurement system, EPS. Throughout the year, we send out monthly e-blasts to registered DBE firms regarding upcoming contracting opportunities in SEPTA, upcoming pre-bid and pre-proposal meetings, and contracting opportunities and outreach events with other agencies. Additionally, firms that are registered in SEPTA's EPS system receive automatic notification when a product or service within that firm's area of business expertise is being procured by SEPTA. To reach as many diverse businesses as possible, this information is also shared with firms in the in the Pennsylvania Unified Certification Programs (PAUCP) DBE Directory, the City Office of Economic Opportunities OEO Registry, as well as the various chambers of commerce. We also partner with the city, elected officials, and organizations to educate small, minority, and women-owned businesses through a series of targeted forums, including the city annual Minority Enterprise Development MedWeek event. These efforts have generated significant business for DBE firms who have contributed their talents and expertise to SEPTA projects. From fiscal year 2016 to 2020, SEPTA awarded more than 16% of its federally funded contract dollars to DBE firms. And because of the SEPTA board action to expand federally DBE goals and procedures to include all SEPTA procurements greater than $100,000 on state-funded projects following the passage of Act 89, SEPTA awarded more than 13% of state-funded contract dollars to DBE firms over the same 5-year period. Between 2016 and 2020, SEPTA awarded a total of $107 million to DBE firms. Because the federal DBE program is very specific about how it tracks and applies procurements with certified firms, SEPTA has historically not captured in data the full spectrum of procurements and business done with diverse businesses. However, in examining procurement data from the past 5 years, SEPTA awarded more than $71 million to minority, women, and disabled-owned enterprise registered with the City Office of Economic Opportunity. To further understand our business partners, we are asking all companies registered in our EPS system to self-identify business certification type, ethnicity, and gender. This will help SEPTA identify the holistic representation of businesses, including Black, Brown, Asian, and LGBTQIA+ owned firms in the greater Philadelphia area. Currently, 964 of the 6,990 companies have provided this detailed information, with 50% of respondents identifying as a non-white and 50% identifying as female. As a result of those two efforts, we are now developing a fuller picture of who we do business with, which will improve how we engage them in the future and how we can generate new business opportunities for our DBE firms and other historically underutilized businesses. We know we have more work to do to grow contracting opportunities with diverse businesses and ensure that public investment is used to not only rebuild SEPTA, but also build economic opportunity for a range of local businesses and workers. As we begin to mobilize our capital program to put the infrastructure bill funding to use and implement the provisions of the Equity and Infrastructure Program, we are also looking at other ways to engage with small, minority, women, and disadvantaged business enterprises. Before I close, I would like to remind Council and those attending today's hearing that next Wednesday, SEPTA and the Enterprise Center are hosting the ABCs of DBE, a virtual workshop on DBE certification. This is an important opportunity for firms that are not currently certified as DBEs to learn more about the program in advance of increased federal funding being made available, and we hope you will share this with your constituents as well as businesses. On behalf of SEPTA, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. Leslie and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate everybody being here. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Leslie, for your team, for your testimony. Just had a question. In your testimony, you indicated that 16% of your federally funded contracts and 13% of your state-funded contracts were awarded to disadvantaged businesses. Can your team break down the demographics on the state level and the federal level of who was awarded those contracts?
Andy, I'll let you respond that. I know we're working to break it down further, but Andy can clarify what we can do right now and what we're working towards.
Yes, we don't have that data available with us right now, but we'll definitely take a look at it and try to break it down for you, sir.
Yeah, can you please provide that data to the chair and members of the committee just so we can just have a complete picture of the work that you're actually doing. I'm excited about the initiatives in terms of outreaching and partnering with the Enterprise Center regarding doing the ABCs of becoming a minority certified business. I'm always getting phone calls on a day-to-day basis regarding, individuals who want to do business with the city, but I tell them you must be minority certified, and they know that they have to go through you, obviously other entities, but we always recommend them to SEPA. So give me an idea with the new diversity initiatives that you have. What are your targeted goals moving forward, like with the infrastructure initiatives and so forth?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Andy can add on a few things. So in putting together the Equity and Infrastructure Program on the national basis, we've worked with USDOT. I specifically was asked, what are the barriers? And we talked about that. And what are the barriers with the current federally procurement issues? And in talking again with USDOT, with private sector partners, public sector partners, we identified several issues. In talking with Chicago Transit, I've worked very closely with Dorville Carter, who's the CEO of the Chicago Transit Authority. We looked into their small business set aside, what worked, what did not work. What they shared with us is they had the best of intentions. They put together a great program, but the participation wasn't where they expected or where they wanted it to be. And they realized after a few years, when they went back, is that they didn't do the appropriate, or they could have done better, I should say, in education up front. That's what part of this ABC for DBEs are. What they saw was a lot of their disadvantaged-owned businesses were used to being subs, and they didn't know how to be a prime. They were making more opportunities for prime projects, and they weren't seeing the applications. They weren't seeing the interest. One thing that we found as we reevaluated our own program, that even the disadvantaged businesses that have been taking, that have been participating, 20% of them are doing well and 80% are not doing well. They don't have the resources. They don't have the support that they need. Part of Equity and Infrastructure is really based around, I shouldn't say part of it, a main part of it is building generational wealth. It's not to give a business a one-time shot and then not give them the support that they need to diversify the scope of their business, the talent, the type of projects that they can go after. And so we're really putting that effort on the front end of things to make sure, again, that we have a larger number of available firms that can do the work. And if they can't do the work, they're asking the right questions, getting the right support, and being paired with firms that are doing our prime work right now and with other industry partners. So that's part of what we're doing. And then Andy, I'll let you also comment.
Okay, thanks. So to Leslie's point, a small number of our registered DBEs are getting the majority of our awarded contract work. So we have, one of the things that we have to do is really find out, where that missing link is. And I think it's a team effort between the DBEs being proactive and kind of going after it and pursuing the work, as well as us continue doing the outreach events and the networking events in order to bring them in and kind of show them what upcoming projects are out there, and also give them the opportunity to network with primes if they want to continue to do the work as a subcontractor. One thing we have found successful in the past is when we have whether it's a stimulus or a new infrastructure bill coming into the city or SEPTA, and there is dollars to be spent, is we try to upplay that as much as possible by having huge network events, bringing everyone in that has the ability to participate in the work under those funds, explain to them the projects that are upcoming, and actually try to answer any questions that they may have. Also, again, when we bring them in, it's minority-owned businesses as well as prime contractors. So that networking is crucial to be able, if you're not able to do the work yourself, to be able to connect with someone that could actually, team up with and do the work. As Leslie mentioned, and I think the previous panelist has mentioned as well, there's still a gap between the financing and the bonding and the insurance that the small businesses really need to have in hand in order for them to compete on projects. So again, that's a global, work and team effort where we try to facilitate, that aspect of, them being able to do the work, as well as, continue education. Again, to the small numbers of the DBs that are getting the work, we also have to get out there and kind of continue the education and make sure that, the other DBEs are not getting the work and not pursuing the work, are actually doing their best, in order to be able to participate and compete for these upcoming projects.
Do you have specific subcontracting goals specifically for African Americans and Hispanic/Latino firms?
So,
a lot of times when we talk about disadvantaged businesses, right, and it's a very broad category, right, and probably what's the most dismal area that we're having issues with here in the city of Philadelphia is particularly the numbers when it comes to African American small business firms and Hispanic business firms, 11.5% and 3.5% respectfully.
Yes, so the way that the DBE program, the federal DBE program is structured, it's based in net worth value. It goes through a process whereby the minority firm, whether it's Black owned, Hispanic owned, or women owned, have to be certified as a DBE. I don't have that information for you, Councilman Johnson, but we could try to, give you a breakdown of, how many of the contract work is going to these specific business entities.
Yeah, we can definitely, we'll keep track of that, and I can tell you a specific emphasis on the equity in infrastructure program is on Black and Brown owned businesses. So we will be tracking that, and I'm not sure, and we are still waiting from USDOT as far as separate participation level goals, but it's something we'll be able to report on. It's something we want to see increase. We want to see it increase significantly. I will let you know, we want to see it increase in all of the historically underutilized businesses, and there is room for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. I know Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Leslie Richards, for all of your work at SEPTA and to the entire team. I truly value working with each and every one of you. I have to shout out Wendy. Thank you for always taking the calls for all of us and responding and getting us all the answers we need from SEPTA. But I just wanted to follow up on a question that Councilmember Johnson posed, because I recognize as a leader that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so what I wanted to ask was, again, if there are specific goals that SEPTA has for what I'd like to call, and I'm not going to say disadvantaged, I'm just going to say minority businesses in general. Are there specific goals for all of your spending categories for minority vendors?
Oh, geez, there's more.
Somebody's not on mute.
Part of us signing the pledge will be going into more detailed information than we currently have. Again, the pledge is going to hold us accountable. There are metrics that we will be signing on. We obviously will be sharing them with you. Not only that, but we've been asked as one of the first 5 signers, and we're the only signers east of Chicago to get other entities involved. So we'll be reaching out to all of you. Obviously, we would love to share the goals with the airport, with Otis. That includes all of the Commonwealth Transportation Agencies, with PennDOT as well. I've already spoken to Secretary Gramian. We have a lot of excitement here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with us all working together on that. So we will share those metrics. We will need to gather them as part of the pledge. I just wanted to point out that the pledge was very careful in not concentrating on they don't like, and I personally do not like the term disadvantaged business enterprises, and that's why they were calling it the HUB program for a while for historically underutilized businesses. But it does include women-owned businesses, and it does include African-American-owned businesses as well as Hispanic-owned businesses.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go back to my question, only because the pledge is not here yet. So if you could detail the specific goals that you all currently have, because in that way we'll be able to measure, the current goals versus the goals of this new pledge.
Sure. We'll get those to you.
Okay.
Now, Andy, if you had anything in addition on that right now.
No, so just one thing I would like to add is that, so we currently have our disadvantaged business enterprise, goal that we set. It's the 3-year goal that we set and we share with FTA and basically their approval. So we have that goal and we apply that goal across our, different contracts for good service.
And what is it, Andy? My apologies for interrupting, but what is the goal? That's the question. My question is just, what is it?
So our DBE goal right now is at 15%, and that's what we monitor, for any awarded projects to make sure that we gain that on an annual basis.
Okay, and so when you say 15%, would you be able to break that down for me? And I only ask this because I've asked every city department for this information. The city has provided it. I told you before, it's a 1,000-page report. So what is it broken down relative to goal for African-American businesses, broken down by African-American male, African-American female, Hispanic male, Hispanic female, Asian male, Asian female, and on down?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not broken down in that fashion. The way it's broken down is basically taking a look at the projects that we have upcoming, and then looking at the number of registered DBEs, or certified DBEs within the database that could actually perform some of the work, within the upcoming projects. But I think to the question, the point that was asked before, we'll go back at, historically and take a look at where the awards are, and then break down, the different business structure entities.
Sure, because I think you all recognize that in order for us to adequately measure the success of any of these initiatives, we need something to go off of, some information to analyze. And so that's what I'm seeking to gather with these questions. So I'll then ask my follow-up question, which would be, what is your current participation rates for businesses broken down by African-American, male, female, Hispanic, male, female, Asian, male, female, on down? So I recognize you may have goals that you can't break down in that way, but because you're contracting with other individuals and businesses, you would know or have the demographic information of those entities, and therefore would be able to supply that information to us broken down in that way. So currently what you have, I'll say, even just for this year and going back the last 3 years, what is the breakdown for your business spend with those businesses, African-American male, female, Asian male, female, Hispanic male, female?
We'll get that information.
Oh, okay. And you can provide that information to the chair so that he can provide it to all of us. That'll be exceedingly helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, and we totally understand it's a reasonable request, and it's one that we should have as we're moving forward. So thank you for those questions, and we'll get, even as I've been in this arena for quite some time, I appreciate the questions along gender, because I don't think that gets enough attention, and I don't think it's been collected in the right way either. So we'll point out as well, I know we have asked voluntarily for that gender information, and we're doing a better job of collecting it, and part of these equity and infrastructure discussions have included that as well. So that is definitely something that has been brought to the attention nationally as well, and we'll keep you up to date.
Awesome. That'll be great, because again, I just want to be able to look at the data and have a proper analysis of the data based on the information that you all provide to us. The other piece of that is I found in just preliminarily reviewing the report that we received from the city, that the women category is often used as a catch-all, and it does not break out to African American women business owners, Asian women business owners, Hispanic women business owners, and it just says women. And in some of those categories, in some of the city departments, again, for African American women, it was 0 all the way down. But in the other women categories, for instance, white women category, it was like 100% in some of the instances, or 83%. But all the other categories, it was either 0 or very low. So that's why I'm trying to pay special attention to, and this is not just for SEPTA, this is for everyone on the call, because this will come up again during our budget season. We need the breakdown for demographic for each of those entities. Please come prepared to the budget hearings to address those specific questions as a follow-up from the report, but also for the quasi-city agency, so that we can just measure the progress or lack thereof that you all are making in this regard. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And then finally, I just wanted to add, I could not leave this conversation without putting this on the record, Leslie, for SEPTA. Apprenticeship programs will be very, very important. We've already reached out to your team. We already had a meeting around the apprenticeship program. So thank you all so much for that meeting. But we want to ensure that we can reestablish some of the programs that used to be in play at SEPTA that are no longer in play for apprenticeship programs for some of the students at the CTE schools who are interested in a career either in transportation or in fleet management or automotive mechanic. Okay, and we want to reestablish those programs so that we can create that pipeline for some of the industries that are coming to Philadelphia, some coming in Councilmember Johnson's district, but in other districts, we'll have multimodal transportation hubs, in and around the airport. So we just want to make sure that we are connecting young people to that employment pipeline because that will increase based on our labor market indicators here in Philadelphia over the next 3 to 5 years. So we will circle back around ensuring that you all have the additional apprenticeship programs so that we can get more young people in the pipeline for those jobs. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your latitude. And again, thank you, Councilmember Johnson, for this very important hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodmore. Much appreciated. Next, we have Stephen Zook, if you're available.
Hello, everyone.
State your name for the record.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Zook. So good morning, Chair Squilla and members of the City Council Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Like I said, my name is Stephen Zook. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Procurement Services for the School District of Philadelphia. I'm pleased to be here with you all today to describe the efforts that the school district is taking relative to diversity and inclusion in contracting. I want to start by highlighting that increasing diversity and inclusion in the contracted work performed on behalf of the district is part of the adopted goals of the school board and the school district administration. We report out on these efforts quarterly. Every 90 days, we have a published report on the results of our ongoing efforts in our district quarterly manager reports. We think it's crucial for us to report out on this information, on the metrics surrounding the foundational goals of the district. For the last full year, which was FY21, 35% of all dollars awarded went to MWBE vendors, which was an increase from 21% in fiscal year 2020. We do have more detailed statistics on this information in our quarterly report, which is available on the school district's website. In our submitted testimony, we have the website listed there. As an overview quickly of how we define MWBE entities, so the school district tracks minority business as any minority-owned or woman-owned business. Minority ownership is defined as being at least 51% owned by Black, Hispanic, Asian and Pacific Islander or Native American shareholders. In our reporting, we do track separately the breakdown of contracts awarded to women-owned and minority-owned businesses. And we do track businesses owned by white women as part of our MWBE overall spend. We do not certify businesses as an MWBE entity internally. We depend on agencies, including the city, also organizations such as WeBank and the Enterprise Center for certification. One of the concerns that has been raised in this meeting and prior is whether or not the contracts that are awarded to include minority vendors actually come to fruition, whether that spend becomes real. And to help ensure compliance on this, we've created a unique MWBE system as part of our Oracle Finance system that will allow us to allow vendors themselves to verify whether they are receiving payment for their services as part of their commitment. So we'll have independent verification by the subcontractors being utilized as to whether they were engaged with on a given contract. I'd also like to highlight some of our ongoing efforts to continually reach a wide array of vendors to support the work of the school district. First and foremost, we've recently completed the hiring process for our Director of Diversity and Small Business, and we're excited to bring on Eric Watkins in this role. He has experience in the city of Philadelphia, including in OEO and in construction, and he's going to be a very valuable asset to our team. We're really excited to have him on board. And in addition to the compliance that we want to ensure is, of the vendors, one of our biggest efforts is going to be around outreach to minority-owned and small businesses. So prior to the pandemic, we were hosting in-person workshops for vendors to learn our process, meet with our buyers, and do meet and greet sessions with program offices at the school district. So vendors in a given industry, for example, transportation, could meet the leaders in the relevant departments at the school district of Philadelphia. We hope to get back to in-person sessions pending safer levels of COVID transmission. In the meantime, we're looking to host some virtual sessions for vendors to learn about existing opportunities and to get connected to our program offices. All of this work is going to require, very close coordination with yourselves on City Council, the City of Philadelphia, regional partners, and a lot of nonprofits and certifying agencies. We will continue to develop relationships with the Enterprise Center, with WeBank, EMSDC, a number of chambers of commerce, and other organizations to move this work forward. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present before the committee this morning, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I know Councilmember Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Stephen, for your testimony. You indicated that 35% of your contracts were awarded in the last fiscal year to disadvantaged businesses. Can you provide a demographic breakdown?
We do have that breakdown in the quarterly report, including, so we break it down in a number of ways. We do break down the type of contract, so construction or construction professional services. We can also provide information on the demographic breakdown as well.
Do you have it currently?
For the current report, there is another report being released in February.
Stephen, do you have the numbers in front of you? Like, I would think the DEI, like hearing you be able to come and say, boom, this is what we're doing. A, B, C, D in these categories. I'm just assuming that's the case.
Understood. If I have a couple minutes, I can pull it up. I do not have it in front of me right now.
Okay. All right. Just make sure that the chair gets a copy.
Absolutely.
Provide that information to other members of council. Give me an overview of your procurement and contracting services around your buildings and contracts and developing your buildings. I know there were some negotiations with the building trades in the past regarding how you were going about utilizing the trades to do the work with the school district and making sure it's diverse and inclusive. Do you have an update on that process? I remember it was brought up at the last budget hearing when the district was here.
Certainly. So regarding diversity in our construction contracts specifically?
Yes, exactly.
So we are looking to, we obviously have an influx of funds for buildings, including from the federal and state governments. So we're looking to really increase our outreach and ensure compliance as well on these contracts. Specifically, that means doing audits of the contracts that are awarded, in order to ensure that if a vendor is, if they commit to, whether it's 15, 20, 30%, that is real. We're going to utilize our new system that we're building in conjunction with the Oracle platform in order to verify that and confirm with minority partners that they are being utilized and that it's legitimate contracts.
Do you have numbers regarding diversity and inclusion, particularly around construction?
So for the most recent quarter, there was 45% of our awarded dollars went to MWBE firms. So that was we had about $42 million awarded in the most recent quarter that we reported out on. And about $19 million of that went to MWBE businesses. And I can provide the breakdown as well of that.
All right. That's what I was going to ask. Okay. All right. Thank you. Is Eric Watkins, is he available?
He is on the call here. He can certainly, introduce himself.
Good morning.
Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Good morning, Councilman. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Welcome aboard on your new position as Director of Diversity. Can you just give us an overview of your vision as it relates to enhancing diversity and inclusion and contracting for the school district of Philadelphia?
Okay, right. As of now, I'm still learning the lay of the land here at the school district. Much like the city of Philadelphia, where they measure things through city departments. Here they have program offices. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to get to meet everyone in all these program offices and find out, who are the decision makers within those programs, and try to get into the process of their procuring their contracts early on so that we can maximize the opportunity to get the most participation on the contracts.
So let me ask you this, Eric. As you go through your process and doing outreach and finding out, who's responsible for what, ideally, what would you like to see as the new person in charge of DEI for the school district of Philadelphia? Your vision.
Well, I think for the most part, some of the larger program offices where they have the larger contracts, specifically in construction, as I hear a lot on the call, you'll be able to get the maximum participation through those processes if we get enough companies registered. We have to build out our own internal database as well as in conjunction with using the data from other entities, much like OEO and WeBank and EMSDC. And so once we get that established, we can, understand the process of getting them certified and registered with the school district and get in the process early enough through the program offices so that we can get the information to them so they can be prepared to be able to bid as a prime or participate as a subcontractor.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric. And I think about some of the things you're talking about. It's a lot of synergy on here in terms of connecting the dots with the district and the work that PIDC is doing. The same as SEPTA, the same as the airport. It's a lot of overlap in the event that it seems like some of the information, shared information, can kind of enhance what everybody is doing. But thank you, Eric, and I look forward to doing a follow-up and having a conversation with you.
Not a problem.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Council Member. Steve, as far as we heard earlier from debarment, and not sure how many people have been debarred, but have you received, during your time there, contractors that have not followed the proper protocols or given information that wasn't accurate that you would then not have them work at the school district? So we have had to work with a number of organizations who, say commit to a percentage initially, and then when the contract starts, are saying that they're having trouble meeting that. So we work with them to make sure that they can meet it. We also work
in conjunction with the city of Philadelphia. So if the city is looking to debar a company due to, say, fraudulent behavior on inclusion, we would also follow that process to investigate the same vendor.
But you haven't done that. No vendors never did that with any contractor at this point.
We have not debarred on our own, just from the school district of Philadelphia contracting process. We have not debarred a vendor specifically for minority inclusion. I can't speak to potentially other reasons for debarment.
All right. And is that because they all have met their goals, or just that's something that you guys haven't done at this time?
It's just not something that we've done at this time. We're generally able to work with vendors and obtain a satisfactory participation rate with them when we sit down. That's not to say that it wouldn't happen in the future, of course.
All right. Yeah, I understand Eric is there now, and I'm sure he'll have oversight over this, and so hopefully that will be a priority moving forward. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to the School District of Philadelphia for participating in this hearing. I just wanted to circle back to your testimony, Mr. Zook, where you notated in your testimony that your minority spend numbers relative to DBE includes white women-owned businesses. So I'll offer the same question to you that I offered to SEPTA and to all of the entities on the call. Can you break down your spend by African-American male, African-American female, Hispanic male, Hispanic female, Asian male, Asian female, and then on down in that manner?
Yes, so we can provide that to the committee, and we can break down by ethnicity and gender.
Okay, that'll be helpful, and you can submit that to the chair for us.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll reserve the balance of my questions for the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Green? Okay, Councilmember Green, I don't know if he's connected. He did have a question. But is Mr. Watkins going to testify, or is he just there to answer questions?
He's here to answer questions. Since he did join us very recently, just 2 weeks ago, we're not asking him to testify at this time, but he is available as well.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Green, go ahead, ask your questions.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Zilkin. This is actually a question that really all of the panelists could answer, but since you are still testifying, I want to get a perspective on what steps you're taking to be proactive to help grow existing businesses. We've talked a lot about growing businesses, but there are a number of existing mature Black and brown businesses in the city of Philadelphia that if we can help them to get to a high level of capacity, they'll be able to hire more individuals in our city and also provide other opportunities for smaller businesses they can partner with to help grow the ecosystem. So from the school district perspective, and also in reference to anything you'd like to provide regarding infrastructure bill, what steps do you see that the district is taking in that regard?
Sure. So it is one of the biggest challenges for us. There's a number of things that we're looking to do. One of the largest challenges, as I'm sure you all hear, is financing and bonding insurance requirements for small businesses. It can be difficult to get that. So one of the things that we want to get back to is hosting these in-person sessions where we can have small businesses come in and meet with not just the school district, but also connect them to the Enterprise Center. So historically, we had people like the Enterprise Center and other organizations who can help with financing, help connect them to other organizations to build their capacity. And then the other aspect is looking at how we award our contracts. So obviously, being the school district, a lot of our contracts are very high dollar value. If some of those contracts can be broken down into smaller dollar amounts, they can be available to smaller businesses that may not have the capacity at this time. And if they have a few of those smaller contracts as primes, they can build up their capacity. So that's one thing that we're looking to do, is make sure that we can identify opportunities that are of a size that a smaller business can bid on and have the bonding capacity for, have the insurance capacity for, and then build up to larger contracts.
So you spoke about partnering with the Enterprise Center and the work that that entity is doing and the work Del Clark has done for some time. So are you also partnering with Ms. Clark and the work that they're trying to provide and raise equity? Because one of the issues that a number of mature companies have is that, yes, they have debt, but they need access to equity. So is the school district using its resources and relationships to help grow some of the initiatives that she's trying to do in reference to growing equity with Enterprise Center, since you're partnering with her?
So it's not something that we have been involved in historically, but it's certainly something that we would be interested in to connect small businesses with those kind of capital resources and make the relationships happen in our contracting process.
Well, I mean, for example, the school district partners with, just like the city of Philadelphia, you work with a number of investment banks, other entities, as well as just like the city has deposits, you also have deposits. So you work with a number of financial entities. And I think that the work that she's trying to do through the Innovate Capital Growth Fund would be an opportunity where the school district could really say, yes, we're trying to grow Black and brown businesses here in the city of Philadelphia, and we're not going to just do it through the traditional way of, debundling contracts, but we're going to use our resources and help connect with the entities that we work with that can help her and the Enterprise Center grow equity, because that's something that's also been not part of the ecosystem. And I'm doing a lot of work on the issue regarding access to credit, because we don't have a real infrastructure that can provide letters of credit and guarantees for businesses to grow. But on the equity side, we don't have it.
Wendy,
Ms. Green Harvey,
Wendy,
Ms. Green Harvey, you can put yourself on mute.
All right. Bye-bye.
Excuse me, could everybody put the phone on mute, please, if you're not speaking? Sorry, Councilman Green.
Thank you. And Ms. Green Harvey, I know your father as well. So, but on a separate perspective, if we can look at how we can go into providing opportunities on the equity side, because that's something that we don't see, and we don't have the capacity that we need for Black and brown businesses, especially mature businesses, to not just go into debt, but also help to grow equity in that space. And that's something that can help grow those businesses. So the fact that you're partnering with Ms. Clark and Enterprise Center on the one aspect, I think it makes sense for you to also partner with her to help her grow her fund through some of the relationships you have at the school district.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we'd definitely be interested in, finding innovative ways to grow the businesses and address some of the real concerns, because it's not ultimately just about, is there a contract available to bid on? It's, like you mentioned, it's, do they have the equity? Do they have the, the financial stability for these contracts? And it's something we'd be very interested in participating in.
And that calls open to all the other witnesses that are on here as well, to not only help in that effort, but also help to really focus on how do we get existing mature businesses to grow so they can hire more people in our city as well. Thank you, Mr.
Absolutely.
Chair. Thank you, Councilman. Is there any other questions? Seeing none, we'll have Ms. Nevins, I guess if you could testify, and then I know Jeff Hornstein, if you want to jump on right after Ms. Nevins, because I know you have to depart. And just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Bovaird Nevins, and I am president of PIDC. Thank you for having me here today, Chair Squilla, Vice Chair Dom, and of course, Councilmember Johnson, and all of the members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. I am here today to share the mission and vision of PIDC as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion within our organization and in our practices through contracting, programming, and services. And I would particularly like to thank Council Members Johnson and Jones for their dedicated service as both members of this committee and of PIDC's Board of Directors. PIDC is Philadelphia's Economic Development Corporation, and we often describe our mission as driving growth to every corner of Philadelphia. At the beginning of 2021, PIDC set forth 6 strategic priorities to guide our work. And at the top of those priorities is a commitment to playing a leadership role in Philadelphia's economic recovery from the impacts of the pandemic and to deploying PIDC's resources across all that we do in terms of lending, business support services, our real estate activities, and leveraging our own purchasing power in ways that address racial inequity and poverty in Philadelphia. As noted in the Philadelphia Equitable Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Assessment and Strategy, which is the same report that Karen Fegley referenced earlier and was released last year by the United Way, the Commerce Department, and PIDC, we identified that Black, Indigenous, and people of color residents represent the majority of Philadelphia's population, but the city's diversity is not reflected in its business ownership. While Black and Latino or Latina residents make up 44% and 17% of the population, they only own 5% and 4% of all employer businesses in our city, respectively. The study found specifically that BIPOC entrepreneurs are especially underrepresented among Philadelphia's emerging high-growth, high-wage industries, including the city's advanced manufacturing and medical technology sectors. And these are the things that we must work together to address. PIDC is currently undergoing a strategic planning process, which explicitly seeks to incorporate a racial equity lens to align and bring into focus our leadership opportunities in Philadelphia's economic recovery. We've invited all council members to provide input in this planning process as key stakeholders in our work and look forward to partnering with you. A key element of that planning process is the creation of an equitable framework for PIDC's contracting and procurement, where we recognize that we have made strides, but that we have significant room for growth and improvement. This framework will outline a strategic approach to expanding our opportunities and strengthening PIDC's partnerships with diverse businesses. The 3 main pillars will be understanding and establishing an equitable policy based on best practices, developing and implementing specific strategies for contracting and procurement, and establishing processes, procedures, and key performance indicators to measure our work and our impact. And while that framework development is about planning for the future, we are committed to this effort right now and appreciate the opportunity to report to you on our current efforts, which also help us to identify where we have more work to do. So as I review these numbers with you, please note that the contract amounts are total amounts approved and may include spending over 1 or 2 year periods that cut across calendar years. And we do provide this on a more detailed basis through our quarterly reporting to the Office of Economic Opportunity. So I'm going to review about 3 years of data. So in 2019, PIDC or paid approved 36 contracts totaling $18.2 million, of which 10.5% were held by minority business enterprise or MBE firms and 9% by women business enterprise or WBE firms. 5 of those were with MBEs as primes and 7 with WBEs as primes. That year, our single largest contract was $6.2 million, which was 34% of our total contracting and had 0% participation. In 2020, PIDC or paid approved 29 contracts totaling $24 million, of which 17.5% were held by MBE firms and 13% by WBE firms, so increases in both. 10 of those were with MBEs as primes, which was a doubling, and 6 with WBEs. That year, our single largest contract was for $17 million, which was 70% of the total contracting and had 17% MBE participation and 12% WBE participation. In 2021, PIDC or paid approved 37 of our typical contracts, which totaled $4.6 million, of which 31% were held by MBE firms and 16% by WBEs. 18 of those were with MBEs as primes and 9 with WBEs. In addition to that contracting in 2021, we also entered into a 10-year operating and maintenance contract totaling about $4 million per year for our Navy Yard utility with a company called Dominion Energy, a publicly traded firm that is neither an MBE or WBE. However, part of the selection process, including evaluating the company's commitment to environmental sustainability as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. So under this contract, Dominion will also manage major repairs and capital projects to the Navy Yard utility, which are anticipated to total somewhere between $20 and $40 million over that same 10-year contract period. For those repair and capital projects, Dominion has agreed to achieve or exceed the participation goals set by OEO of 18 to 23% MBE and 12 to 17% WBE, and further agreed to a combined MBE and WBE commitment of a minimum of 40% total over that term. We are seeking to ensure that our commitment to inclusive procurement and expanded opportunities for MBE and WBE companies is front and center across all aspects of our organization, and we know that we still have much work to do. For example, we have not disaggregated our contracting data by race and ethnicity, and including the intersection with gender, but we will do so for our prior 2 years and provide that information to this committee. Through our efforts, we strive to become a model for procurement diversity to enhance local businesses and contribute to a vibrant Philadelphia. Our commitment at PIDC, given our mission around economic development, really goes beyond just the contracting side of things as we look at how we can support minority and women-owned enterprises to participate in Philadelphia's economic future. One example of this that I know is very important to Councilmember Johnson, since this is his district, is the recent process to select a new development partner for the future phases of growth and development at the Navy Yard. In selecting that partnership, we put diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront of the selection. Our process strongly encouraged all bidders to include minority equity ownership as well as robust, diverse business participation, which we believe is setting a new standard and expectations not only for our own projects, but for development in Philadelphia as a whole. In selecting the combined team of Ensemble Mosaic to become the new private development partner at the Navy Yard, the group's commitment to DE&I at all levels, including their ownership, really helped their proposal to stand out in a highly competitive selection process. Beyond that process, we continued our commitment through the developer agreement negotiation and working collaboratively with the team of Ensemble Mosaic to support their efforts and create a bold commitment to DE&I. So far, that team has hired over 20 local and national minority, women, veteran, and other disadvantaged business enterprises for over $7 million in contracts, which total about 50% of the spend for the current phase of this project. Into the future, their commitment includes a minority equity investment for all projects, community investment platform that will allow Philadelphians to invest through crowdfunding in the ownership of the projects at the Navy Yard, a charitable foundation that will be funded with some of the proceeds from the development to support economic empowerment of minorities and women in real estate development, a commitment to both diverse and local workforce participation in construction, business opportunities in terms of affordable tenant spaces for minority and women retail businesses, including subsidized lease terms, and an internship program with local universities to bring opportunities to minority and female students. PIDC believes that the model example at the Navy Yard will lead to, and has even in some cases led to, subsequent projects adopting a similar approach and creating new opportunities for Black and Brown developers in our city. We are also pairing this with increased access to capital for those developers. Over the last 2 years, we've provided somewhere in the range of $27 million to developers of color, both for-profit and nonprofit entities, for development projects throughout the city. We're also strongly committed to deploying financial and business education resources to communities that have been historically disenfranchised from access to capital. PIDC has a broad set of activities and services that are specifically targeted to support minority business enterprise contracting outside of large development projects. Our contract line of credit provides support to small, minority, women, and disabled-owned businesses that need a line of credit to fund contract-related working capital. Currently, PIDC is supporting 13 contractors through that product and related business supports. Of those businesses, 77% are Black-owned, 8% Latino-owned, 15% white-owned, and 31% women-owned. We are committed to supporting these small business owners so that they not only receive much-needed capital, but also education services from PIDC's business experts. Through client engagement and one-on-one support services, our team provides business supports and education to help with the development of the knowledge around financials, market opportunities, and state standards and regulations. We are, to that end, hosting an upcoming series of workshops in partnership with the SBA this March, so next month, a three-part series particularly focused around federal contracting opportunities. Addressing longstanding institutional racism is a complex, multifaceted, and long-term effort. We acknowledge that this work requires actively engaging stakeholders, listening to community leaders and experts, reflecting and intentionally developing equitable economic opportunities that will support minority business development that is inclusive of every Philadelphian. PIDC is committed to long-term change so that together we can create a city and economy that supports every neighborhood, allows all of our citizens to thrive, and drives growth to every corner of the city. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ann. And a lot of this information you provided, I know just from being a part of the board and work with my chief of staff, Chris Sample, and so forth. But could you just provide either today or to the board, you broke down the expenditures of the contracts that have been distributed, but within the categories, just the actual demographics. And so that's the theme today. So we can do a deeper dive on separating the support for predominantly African American Hispanic businesses separate from rather be LGBTQ AI businesses or veteran businesses or women businesses, which we all support, right? But we want to definitely make sure that around African and Hispanic businesses that there's an emphasis there. Do you have any direct data reflecting that information today?
I don't have it today, council member, but we will look at that for our last 2 years and provide that back to the committee as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, please provide that to the board. And then just last but not least regarding Mosaic Ensemble, right? Something I'm very proud of because I watched that process and I've been a member of the board since 2011. And so I would be not being totally transparent if I didn't say that you totally changed the paradigm shift in terms of diversity and inclusion and how PIDC operate. And no knock on anybody that was previously before you, because we had good working relationships as well, but it's just a different level of engagement and zero-like focusing on this issue. And who would have thought during that time period that an African-American firm would be responsible on a 10-year plan at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And so definitely kudos to you and your team for that robust process and making sure we pick an individual that have a commitment to diversity and inclusion, particularly with the work that needs to be done at the Philadelphia International Airport. And so that's all I have at the moment. But I want to let my colleague ask another question. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know. But that's all I have at the moment, Ann.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Quinona Sanchez, you have a question?
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for holding this hearing. And Ann, I know we have a meeting pending. I also have a data request, if you could submit to the chair. When you spoke around access to capital, you talked about, the work you're doing around 13 contractors and so forth, and some of the work that you're doing there. Could you provide the data around where your investments are outside of contracting, your loan products, and then break that down demographically. As you know, the conversation is always around access to capital, and while I want to encourage the work around the supporting 13 contractors, I want to know of the lending that PIDC has done. And please separate the one that is RCAP related, because those are required by the state, versus your traditional lending by demographic information. That would also be helpful to us in looking at what is a real crucial part of this conversation.
Absolutely, Councilmember. I'd be happy to do that. So we will get that information into the committee as well. I can speak to it. I mentioned the demographics for our contract line of credit, but I can also speak to it briefly, if you'd like, regarding our Restart Philadelphia loan, which is probably the largest, which is the single largest business lending program that we have been running really over the last 2 years, and that is part of our economic recovery efforts. To date, we have approved around 53 loans to small businesses in that program, close to $6 million. And in terms of the racial demographic breakdown for that program, we have 14% Asian or Asian American owned businesses, 31% Black or African American owned businesses, 18% Hispanic or Latino owned businesses within that product. But we'll review the data comprehensively and get that over to you for all of our lending activities.
And I'm encouraged by the increase of the numbers, although I will say I'm extremely disappointed in how bad the numbers were prior to what you outlined in 2022. I think, those of us who, the city has an extensive relationship with PIDC. And when I looked at your contracting numbers, 10% in 2019, 17% in 2020, and now 31%, although the spend is a lot less. Can you speak specifically as to what you have done differently to increase, and what other things are you looking to do in the future so that there is a greater number of participation in the contracting part?
Sure, absolutely. So as I mentioned, that's really a critical part of our strategic planning activities. So we are right now under contract with a Black woman-owned firm, which is called Madison Advisors, that is our strategic planning partner. So they're working with us on kind of a relatively broad scope, but one very specific piece of it is coming up with new policies, procedures, and practices related to contracting and procurement. So that's actually a big, part of the scope that they're working on now. All council members have been invited to participate in upcoming session with Madison Advisor. We would love to, engage with council and make sure that we get your input as we, look holistically at PIDC's overall strategies, but specifically around this, contracting and procurement. So we've identified a lot of areas for improvement in terms of how we do what we do, and including some of the things that have been talked about already on this call. So previously, we have not been disaggregating the data by race and ethnicity, and including looking at that intersection with gender, as Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, made, I think, very clear in her earlier questions. So that is absolutely something that we will be, doing going forward. And I think, and we've seen this with our lending activity too. I mean, Councilmember, if you had asked me that question about our lending data and breaking that out by race and ethnicity 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do it for you. But that is something that we have shifted in terms of our practices, and I think you can't change what you're not measuring. So even, so taking those, steps are some of the things that we are very focused on. I would say even, giving the example of the strategic planning work that we're undertaking as an example, when we went to procure that was going to be something that we were paying for, as PIDC. We didn't have any, federal funding. We didn't have any, state resources that were coming into that might, dictate a certain type of procurement process. So we went, and asked for recommendations for specifically potentially minority-owned firms who do that type of service that we could potentially partner with. And we got a really robust list and, kind of built that out. And we used that to undertake our solicitation process because we felt that that was very important in terms of, who we wanted to work with and how we wanted to partner. So again, where we have flexibility to undertake, procurement in a way that, for those situations where we have our own kind of maximum flexibility, I think we're really just trying to think differently about how we start it, also how we build relationships and how we think about, our client base as opportunities to, build relationships to support people, not only in terms of the access to capital that they need, but how are we connecting those businesses with real opportunities to grow and scale. I think that is part of the excitement that we have that I know, Councilman Johnson referenced about the Navy Yard and the fact that this is a, at least a decade, probably a multi-decade, build out under the, new development partnership of Ensemble and Mosaic, and how can we work collaboratively with them as they go out and develop a pipeline of, buildings and operations and retail tenants and everything that needs to happen. How can we pull together all of PIDC's other resources, our lending, our business education, other types of supports to comprehensively, help businesses really have opportunities to grow and scale and try to pull all of those pieces together. So we're thinking a lot about what we can do better and very much welcome the opportunity to engage with council in those strategies.
And then finally, I go to the Navy Yard and I always think it's a different world. And unfortunately, it is a different world than the rest of the city. Speak to me about what are the challenges and what are the goal setting that you're going to do around ensuring that your investments are more equitable around the city and other neighborhoods besides the Naval Yard. So speak to me about what PIDC is thinking in that regard.
Sure, absolutely. And I would say, in terms of our capital and our lending activities, the vast majority of that really takes place outside of the Navy Yard. So we certainly spend more of our, lending resources, both with small businesses as well as development projects outside of what we do at the Navy Yard. And again, I know you asked for that data, council member, and we will provide that, after this hearing. But, I guess I would point to, our lending, particularly in terms of focusing on developers of color. So as I mentioned, we've been looking at, what we've done over the last 2 years. I think these numbers are actually a little dated now because we closed some things in the fourth quarter of 2021 that probably aren't, reflected, but it was around $27.5 million of lending to projects all around the city. I don't think any of them were at the Navy Yard, actually. So all, outside in neighborhoods from, Strawberry Mansion to Wayne Junction to, Sharswood, that are led by developers of color, both for profit and nonprofit. I think our lending was somewhere in the $27.5 million range, and the total project costs were around $120 million throughout different neighborhoods of the city. And we'll be sure to include that in the data that we send over.
Thank you. And again, I'm a little frustrated to learn that some of this capturing of data around ethnicity was not happening prior to your leadership. But, we're destined to repeat history if we don't learn from it. So speak to me about how you're going to go back and look at the disparity that existed and how that's going to influence your goal setting as you move forward.
Yes, absolutely. So as I think, we are going through this strategic planning process. One of the things that we are incorporating within that is the setting of new key performance indicators. So we had previously, a 3-year strategic plan that took PIDC through, I think, from 2018 to 2020. And as part of that plan, which was determined in 2017 and then covered the next 3-year period, our aggregated goal at that time was for PIDC's business lending resources to achieve 50% combined minority and women business participation, and we were able to meet that goal. But I think, to your point, council member, that's not probably enough, relative to where we are right now, and really addressing the significant disparities, that we see in the city. So in the, for example, in the Restart Philadelphia loan that I mentioned, we specifically set a goal of achieving 50% lending to historically disadvantaged owned businesses, which include Black or African American, Hispanic, Asian or Asian American, Native American, and Pacific Islander. So, that is one way in which we've already, increased the goals over the last couple of years. And as part of how we look at the strategic planning process, setting those key performance indicators in terms of what should our targets be going forward, and how are we going to ensure that we continue to measure, track, and report out on those transparently is going to be a big part of that process.
Thank you, Ann. And let me remind you that PIDC has, because of the way you're set up and the table in which you operate, you have a lot of access to banks who have historically redlined and not provided equitable disbursement, and sometimes have supported PIDC, right, to meet some of their own legally required CRA requirements. Really going to look in the next year about how you set those goals and how you use your voice and your table to advocate. Because the disparity, particularly in the banking institution, even as we do economic development in the community, we continue to see the numbers are not equitable. And in some of the investments that some of the banks are doing, that how you shape some of those partners that are at your table shape the kind of investments that they make. I represent, for instance, South Kensington, that is quickly gentrifying. And I see some of the investments coming in, but they're not going to people who look like me, right? They're going into the new people that are moving in, not the folks that are there. And so we all have a role to play around advocating for the banking institutions and the ones that grant you money or lending opportunities to make sure that they're doing a better job at their investment practices in these neighborhoods. Because now the new game is, you're giving it to, and you're investing in certain zip codes, but they don't tell you who they're investing in. And those folks, again, continue not to be people who look like me. So it's something that we all have a responsibility to continue to monitor and advocate for. And, the frustrating part about government is we can't ask the private sector to do what we don't do, right? It's like we got to do it first, show that it could be done, and then we can hold others accountable in a more, transparent way. So I appreciate your work and your effort, and look forward to looking at some of these data sets that will come in, and again, the goal setting, because ultimately that becomes important about where we're going, because we know where we've been, and we don't want to go back there. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Evans, thank you for your work at PIDC. It's interesting, I had earlier talked about an individual that needed some additional access to credit, and you had reached out. He actually reached back out to me. It was a clerical error that a city department made, is why he did not get his most recent invoice paid, which we believe it will be corrected. But I will make the introduction with you and him. But one of the things that a number of people talked about, and I had an engaged conversation with Ms. Tipton earlier, is access to credit. I know we've had a lot of conversations, and Councilmember Sanchez has talked about issues with the reference to banks and redlining, and we've had quite a bit of conversations regarding public banking and the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority about providing access to credit through letters of credit and other credit enhancements. And I think you would agree that access to credit is a major issue within the city, especially for Black and brown businesses. And I know you're working with the Accelerator Fund, which is an entity that's helping to help address issues regarding Black developers, and working closely with them to establish kind of a working framework. And I think it's that type of cooperative work that needs to occur, both through this hopefully future entity as well as PIDC. And can you talk a little bit about how you're working with the Accelerator Fund, who on paper, both you and the Accelerator Fund are very similar, but you're kind of working together to help grow development in the city for especially Black and brown developers, which is an issue that's a concern, especially with all the development that's happening in the city of Philadelphia.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Councilmember, and thank you for your focus around the capital access needs for small businesses. So in terms of the Accelerator Fund, it's interesting, PIDC from our mission perspective has always focused on, jobs, commercial, industrial, and in more recent years, mixed use type of activity throughout the city. And we have not traditionally focused on supporting projects that are only I shouldn't say only, that are specifically housing. And so when the concept of the Accelerator Fund, started to get underway, it sort of felt like, okay, PIDC, we have all these resources and we're putting those resources towards projects that, again, fit into those, commercial, industrial, mixed use, retail, job creating type of projects. And the Accelerator Fund was really focusing specifically around the incredibly important issue in our city of affordable housing. And so, sitting side by side. I think as, time went on and as we started to have, more collaborative and more in-depth conversations with our, partners at PHDC and also with the city, it became increasingly clear that at this point in time, PIDC is really focused on the clients that we already work with who, that I mentioned in terms of developers of color, Black and brown development companies. And that was a big target of what the Accelerator Fund was seeking to do as well. So not necessarily just focusing on development of affordable housing, and for PIDC, not necessarily just focusing on getting projects done, but really on who is our target market. And that's really where the intersection, started to I think come clearly to light. And Councilman, you were part of some of those conversations and in kind of connecting those dots. So I think as we both realized, that's really who we are focused on supporting with our capital and other resources, we started to say, well, how could we work more effectively if we came together in some form of partnership, make it easier for Black and brown developers to not have to go through multiple front doors or, maybe miss out on, if there's a project that could benefit from both the resources of the Accelerator Fund and of PIDC. So again, we're still, really still in the kind of trading ideas, trading paper, trading, possibilities in terms of how we can partner together to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. But we think that there's a there, especially because, PIDC already has through PIDC Community Capital an established CDFI that can be, a mechanism that I think can help to support what the Accelerator Fund is seeking to do as they go, into their path to ultimately, to ultimately raise more capital and support more development as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised and gave that background because that type of partnership is what we need in the city. The fact that PIDC and that Accelerator Fund and hopefully soon the Philadelphia Public Finance Authority working collaboratively together to provide access to credit and provide lending, that's on the one side, but having that relationship with the city, with SEPTA and with the school district, so that way entities that are coming to those organizations that need more access to credit, that need access to lending products, that we're working collaboratively, so we're helping to grow businesses in our city. I mean, when we have the numbers I talked about earlier, we can't have the silos of our financial financing entities over here, but in the city, the school district, and SEPTA are coming in contact with those businesses who are doing either some work or would like to do more work those businesses, but they know they need access to credit or need access to additional lending. So hopefully the collaborative work that you're doing with Accelerated Fund and also with the Financial Authority in the future will also lead into collaboration with the city and SEPTA and the school district. So that way we're helping and providing ecosystem, not just on the contracting side, but also on the financing side and access to credit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Councilmember. We share that as well, and I certainly will be following up. From this hearing, our teams already work closely together on identifying contractors that are seeking or have active opportunities with entities like SEPTA or entities like the school district. But I think that there's clearly more, collaboration that can occur, and I will make sure that I follow up with my counterparts across those organizations and make sure that we are offering all the resources that PIDC has to be able to help the businesses that are seeking to do more with those entities get what they need.
Mr. Chair, if he's not available, I'm going to ask next for Steve. I'm going to call on Steve for Gina Kellogg from Gina Harrison, from the African American Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon, Chairman Squilla, members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. My name is Regina Hairston, President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And I am here to testify on behalf of Resolution 210966. I thank the sponsor of this resolution, Councilmember Johnson, for instructing this council to further examine an issue that continues to plague our city. A city that for years has consistently failed in addressing the core issue of equal opportunity. A city where African Americans are the majority, representing 44% of its citizens. The latest annual disparity report from the Office of Economic Opportunity, which is the 2020 report, indicates that slightly less than 20% of city contracts were awarded to minority-owned businesses. More specifically, Black-owned companies only won 11.5% of city contracts, and Hispanic-owned businesses earned about 3.5%. These results are disproportionate to the city's population. The Philadelphia Equitable Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Report, produced in partnership with United Way, the Commerce Department, and PIDC, further indicated that Black and brown businesses often lack the capacity to compete for large contracts or city contracts, in large part due to the availability of opportunities that will allow these businesses to grow. In fact, the disparity study identifies many of the barriers that the corporate and public sector have discussed for years, such as frustration with the bidding process, more specifically, that the requirements are complicated, time-consuming, and the belief that the city favors large businesses that have a track record of working with government entities, the difficulty connecting with and working with prime contractors, and the view that prime contractors have established relationships with select subcontractors and utilize the same subcontractors for various work, and the skepticism of the city's ability to pay invoices on time, indicating the payment process is very challenging as cash flow is critical to daily operations of small businesses. With the forthcoming infrastructure dollars from the Biden administration making its way to the city, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to encourage, to encapsulate, and to ensure that Philadelphia's Black and brown population have equal access and opportunity to funding that will build capital for future generations. But these investments must be intentional at every level and at every sector that include, but is not limited to, more diversity in top levels of government that are in the decision-making process, and ability for departments to be held accountable that don't work to meet MWDSB goals. Develop a more transparent, streamlined process for businesses to participate, and greater support in navigating the city's procurement system and process. For our city truly to achieve inclusive, equitable growth, we have to be committed to wanting to change this disparity. The days of the city's purchasing and contracting more goods and services from Black and brown businesses must be secondary to ensuring that those businesses have the opportunity to receive prime contracts. This is the time to achieve equity and ensure all Philadelphians have the opportunity for prosperity. Thank you for your time and consideration today.
Thank you, Regina, and I appreciate, I guess I would call it the front line feedback from the businesses that you work with that's a part of the chamber that added to this particular hearing. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? All right, thank you very much, Regina.
Thank you.
Next, we want to have Jeff Bornstein from the Pennsylvania Economy League. Jeff may have had to step off the call, and if he did, we're going to call on Ms. Joanne Bell from the Black Women's Leadership Council. Let me see if he stepped off, Ms. Joanne.
I just have to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So thank you, Councilman Johnson, for asking me to testify today. And thank you to the committee. So I want to start that in 1984, Philadelphia elected its first Black mayor with the hope and the promise that the Black Philadelphia would participate in the financial growth. We're 38 years later, and we are still fighting the same group of businessmen that have a death grip on the city. Now, public policy is what we're discussing here today. But I'm going to, go away from my text that I had started in the beginning, because I listen very intently, and I normally do a radio program where I have to sit still for 3 hours. So this is a long period of time. So I listen intently. I listen to the school district. I listen to Scepter. I listen to the city representatives at large. All knew that they were coming here today to testify, and the resolution that you had very clearly laid out what you saw as the problem, that 11% went to African Americans and so forth and so on. I noticed that everybody showed up, but they were not able to break down the categories. I would think that if I'm being asked to testify, that I would assemble my staff, I would have had that information, and I would have been ready to address it, whether it looked good for me or not. Because if it is about going forward and improving it, they don't collectively give me the sense that they fully understand that sometimes we do things in rote, and this is something that you check off on the box that you got to do in order to get to the next step. Unless and until we put the heat and the pressure on the people, they're not going to change. They haven't changed in 38 years. We've had 38 years to be able to address this problem. We come back every other year with a sense of urgency, some of us, but it never gets done. Let me tell you why it doesn't get done. If we don't select people in the positions, and I'm not just talking about the underlings that that have to report up, but if we don't get the right people at the top, they're not going to send the right message. If we do not get the right commissioners and secretaries and all of the other people who understand that a part of their job is to make sure that this happens and that they will be judged by that, they're not going to do it because they don't see it as important. They're comfortable in their own skin with supporting those things that feel good for them and helps the constituency that they feel much more aligned to. Now, I heard Councilman Green say 25% poverty. I think it's higher than that. But there's a direct correlation between the poverty in this city and the lack of opportunities. I sit with a business roundtable, and many of the members of this roundtable run companies that's around $100 million. They're located in Philadelphia, but most of their business comes from out of Philadelphia. They struggle to stay here. One told me he can do business easier in Alabama than he can in Philadelphia. We have a problem here. And the problem is the will to do it. Not to talk, because I heard a lot of rhetoric this morning. mattresses and this and that. Rhetoric. You have to have the will to want to do it. How is an RFP written and who writes it? Who's the review team? And is it diverse? We have prime companies who get selected, and because they know that they need a minority company, they bring a minority company in and they give them the worst part of the work so that they can get rid of them. There's no enforcement. There's no investment. Very little investment here. If you know what the problem is, we do not have the investment that goes along with the interest. It's public policy, it's interest, and it's investment. And if you don't have those three, we will have this same conversation, council, next year, year after next. And then we'll clutch our pearls and wonder why our kids are shooting at each other. Because we've robbed them of all opportunity. And before COVID, I say this on my show, the Black Women's Leadership Show, that if you go downtown, this is before COVID, in the middle of the afternoon, and watch who comes out of the office buildings, you will not see any of the people who we need to see working in Center City and in and around these corporations. They don't have opportunities. They don't even have opportunities in their own neighborhoods because the investments are not being made. So I'm at this point. Unless we get from the top down the kind of people in office and the kinds of people that are appointed who are very interested in solving this problem, not give us their rhetoric, but solving the problem, we're going to be right back here again. And guess what? I'm going to be back here again telling you the same thing. So I appreciate the invitation. I'm not one that's an easy person to come and tell people what they want to hear. I tell you the things that you don't want to hear. So I just think that we need to start with making the changes and being serious about these changes. And it really rests not just with you, council. It rests on the second floor as well. I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joanne. And as always, thank you for your insight and always speaking truth to power. Will the chair please call the next panel?
Yes, can we please have Donna Ali, Akil Sabar, and George Burrell, please?
Yeah, I'm going to turn mine over to Akil. Akil.
And before we bring on Akil, any questions or comments from members of the committee? I'm sorry. Okay. Hearing none. Akil? Akil, are you there?
He's on, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Very sorry about that. So basically what we wanted to do, well, first and foremost, we
Akil, can you just state your name?
I'm very sorry. Yes, my name is Akil Sabor. I'm the Executive Vice President of Team Clean Incorporated. And Team Clean is a janitorial services and maintenance company that's been in existence for the last 40 years, headed up by Ms. Donna Ali. And I really would like to thank all parties who have facilitated this, starting with the chairman and Councilman Johnson and all that are present. And we have a unique experience in public sector procurement that basically has resulted from tenacity, taking advantage of the opportunities that have been set forth in public policy, taking the bricks and bats
associated with making it happen for our company and also for the employees. And also, some successes, and as the testimony is going throughout the day, we've experienced pretty much everything that has been spoken of with respect to some of the challenges. So what we basically wanted to offer very simply was the recommendation to enforce vigorously what exists with respect to public policy, laws that have been enacted by City Council, laws that are supported by the state and federal statutes to ensure that opportunity is there. One of the issues that we basically have looked at over the years is that, minority companies are no different from the Fortune 500 firms that have received, massive subsidies and support in the aerospace industry, in military procurement, agricultural support dollars to facilitate the growth and sustainability of those sectors. And so it seems as though, there is an aversion to want to include other members of society, Black and brown, to engage in the same process of taking advantage of opportunities that are put forth by the public sector. So there are robust enforcement procedures within OEO that can be enforced. There's the collaboration that should take place between finance and also the procurement departments with respect to companies getting paid. And we'd like to say that we've had an excellent relationship after going through some pain, but we've had an excellent relationship in our procurement process, our bidding process with the city, and also getting paid after some delay in that regard. But it's not the type of thing that we would want to see the companies that exist today, the Black and brown companies that exist today, and those companies to follow, to go through a 40-year process of getting up to scale. It's just, we're in an era where that's really unacceptable, given the technology, given the access, given the globalization of opportunities. So essentially, one small bit of recommendation that we would like to make is that, there's a process within city government where it's known as, the certified payroll. We have to basically make sure that we are paying our people according to the prevailing wage that's set by the city. And there's a process that we have to go through to certify that, and everyone here is pretty much familiar with that. What would be very helpful in the process of enforcing that provision is that if there is a time when a small company, mid-sized company, minority firm, female-owned firm has not met that requirement timely, that a notice is provided to that company prior to an enforcement action taking place. So because, there's a basic disconnect. There's an enforcement action when a company has failed to comply, either by virtue of not being aware, but then there's a delay process with respect to the contracts being awarded and also funds being paid or invoices being paid in a timely manner. So what basically happen is that labor standards may freeze any receivables that company is entitled to until the problem is resolved. When in actuality, the basic business practice is similar to the Internal Revenue Service, similar to, any of the taxing agencies, state or state and federal, they provide notices that they intend to do X, Y, Z and give you time to remedy it before any action is taking place. Because freezing the receivables of a company puts them at a disadvantage in terms of payroll, obligations to suppliers, and everything else associated with your capital being frozen. Also, the monitoring aspect within OEO really has to be set up with respect to all these new dollars that have been talked about on this call. And we will recommend, this is our second recommendation, that a special unit is set up to facilitate the monitoring of all of these federal dollars that are coming into the city to ensure inclusion and a diverse spend among the businesses that that have typically been shut out. So those are, that's just really our summary. We did not want to make any other contributions to this call except for those two policy positions. Basically ensuring that companies get paid in a timely manner, and if there's going to be any holdup in their payments, to provide adequate notice and to put the appropriate mechanisms in place to make sure that these hundreds of millions of dollars that are flowing to the city are spread out appropriately. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman. You're on mute, Councilman.
Thank you, Akil. That was very, very informative with specific recommendations. And you also provided some input regarding the notification process, which is eye-opening to me. Like, you shouldn't be penalizing an individual without giving them proper notice regarding the payroll program. But thank you for those recommendations. Any questions or comments from members of the committee?
Not connected.
Let me see. All right, thank you very much. Donna, would you like to go on, or do you have any comments, Donna? Ali?
No, I'm going to wait until George has his comments.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Mr. George Burrell, just state your name for the record.
George Burrell, and thank you very much, Councilman. And it's one of the misfortunes of going last or close to last is a lot of what you said has either been said, you're going to say has either been said or you're going to contradict it. And as the pessimist in the crowd, I'm probably going to contradict more than I'm going to agree. But having participated in public life since 1976, I often reflect on why Black business participation and the award of prime contracts are not higher priorities. Black businesses are underutilized assets in our city. Increasing Black prime contracts, increasing Black participation will accelerate Black contractor positioning in the mainstream economy, and Black businesses will increase subcontract with Black brothers and sisters and create Black, blue, and white collar jobs, all of which are in need of in the city today. John Street, as mayor, created signature opportunities for Black businesses, including Black women like Lorraine Brown, Cheryl McKissick, Pat Corbin, and Lana Felton Gee. But unfortunately, despite periodic winners, administrations and public agencies have not made the review and decision-making changes in procurement protocols required to deliver proportionate Black participation as a predictable outcome. And only PIDC today made any reference to the procurement process. And the biggest problem for Black businesses, for prime contract opportunities and or subcontract opportunities, is the malfunction of the procurement process in the city and public agencies. Structural change is mandatory. It requires more than access to capital and distributing infrastructure dollars fairly. Some of the presenters have already contradicted my thoughts. They challenge Black business preparedness, describe intermediate solutions, and recommit to change. But decades of broken promises and Black demographics demonstrate existing strategies require transformation. Blacks win virtually no prime contracts and participate in 8 to 12% of annual city spending because procurement personnel, project managers, and prime contractors intentionally or coincidentally discriminate. The status quo has become the norm, and absent competitive incentives,
with consequences, prime contractors have no motivation to expand Black participation and business growth that could negatively impact their preferred white subcontractors. Achieving Black proportionate participation requires difficult decisions. It requires increasing the percentage of annual spending with protected class businesses and thereby reducing prime contractor spending, or protected class spending has to be redistributed, likely negatively impacting white women. In that context, the Black business community needs building capacity and proportionate participation to be a moonshot priority, and members with aspirations should fix the now and future for unborn entrepreneurs. Expanding the staffing, power, and influence of the Office of Economic Opportunity in procurement and project management warrants consideration. Given civil service restrictions, increased OEO staffing and power can add diverse participation and perspective to procurement reviews and awards. With OEO oversight, city departments also should be required to appoint diversity officers responsible to prepare and submit annual and individual department participation plans and goals. The mayor's cabinet and CEOs of public agencies should have public accountability for annual participation outcomes. City council should recommend city and public agencies retain consultants, and I applaud PIDC for having done this, including Black firms, to provide aggressive recommendations for transforming procurement protocols and producing proportionate Black outcomes. Their work product should be presented in public hearings. We also should begin to consider what are the changes that need to be made that can change outcomes. RFP responses should be required to name Black subcontractors and describe the quality and value of work to be awarded. Quality, pricing, and profit margins should be factors in scoring and awarding contracts. Quality work is essential for Black business growth. And the process that too often allows prime contractors to select subs after contract awards facilitates discrimination. Consideration also should be given to reviewing subcontracts after awards to confirm consistency. Oftentimes, prime contractors really put it to subcontractors after they've won the contract and the city disappears. Attention should be paid to the sophistication of work awarded to Black businesses beyond certification standards, but eligible for local contracts. Too often they are given low-level, low-margin assignments to protect preferred majority subcontractors. Program sponsors, as some have spoken to this today, program sponsors should unbundle contracts to create sheltered markets where Black businesses can compete for prime contracts. And there's been a lot of discussions today about prime contracts, and prime contracts are important. But there are a lot of really successful, rich, white subcontractors in Philadelphia. We should not be overlooking that there is real potential in subcontracts. And everybody wants to push us in the direction of prime contract. Not everybody's going to get to be a prime contractor. It just doesn't work that way. Encouraging it is what is interesting to me, encouraging Black contractors to be engaged in RFP preparation and using that participation towards satisfying percentage participation requirements should be considered. In the current process, Black businesses are rarely ever participating in the preparation process because it doesn't count. So white businesses don't put them in. If you put them in, and so under this circumstance, the only Black businesses who get any money are the ones who wind up on the winning team. But if you counted the dollars spent in preparation and made that a factor of competition, then you're going to find more white businesses including them, and you create a new revenue stream for those businesses that doesn't exist today. Given City Council's transparency legislation, RFP should require copies, and the review process should consider evaluating the diversity programs of prime contractors as a part of the city process. You all have talked earlier today about how do we leverage the influence of agencies. Well, that's one of the ways that you can use the transparency information that you collect. Percentage participation should be assigned to all contracts: low bid, best value, and sole source. Failure to satisfy participation should disqualify bidders, and high bars should be mandated for granting waivers. Black participation also should be mandated in change orders, and the percentage participation measured against all businesses is because the percentages that we see, and I know this was the fact with the state, and it's probably the fact with the city, is that it's not all of the dollars spent by the city that is used to calculate minority participation. Usually low bid contracts are left out, and it's usually a percentage of the dollars spent in spaces where they determine that there are black businesses to compete. So if they determine that there are no black businesses to compete, that number, that dollar, those dollars don't go into the denominator. So that when we did that at the state, the state's black participation went from 11% to 4% when you include all the dollars in, and I guarantee you the cities is likely to go down also. And percentage participation should be assigned to all contracts, to low bid contracts, to best value contract, to sole source contracts. You force them to find ways. You don't just have to have businesses who can do the specific things in there. There are all kinds of services that can be provided in contracts. Somebody's got to drive the sole source information somewhere. And there are lots of ways to be able to do that. Annual dollars with protected class businesses also should be calculated based on actual dollars paid, not contracted. It shouldn't be on an accrual basis. It should be on the actual dollars paid in a fiscal year to those businesses. And it should be, as I said, as a percentage of dollars spent for all goods and services. Professional service contracts awarded to majority firms should allocate some percentage of origination fees to black members of law firms and accounting firms. Fee origination helps obtain partnerships and equity participation. Forums should be provided for subcontractor protests. Otherwise, blacks are at the discretion of prime contractors who rely on lax oversight to protect arbitrary behavior. Because protected class participation can be achieved, and you've talked about this today, with black businesses at 8 to 12%. The city reported over 30% participation last year. Black participation must be monitored and managed carefully, and you all have stressed that point very aggressively today. And it also you might find it interesting for the committee to meet with the Department of General Services Deputy Secretary Kerry Kirkland to hear transformative changes the Commonwealth has made to procurement, project management, and bipartisan legislation that's been introduced into the General Assembly. And I will probably get tarred and feathered for the following, but I'm a firm believer that Philadelphia should welcome black businesses from around the country. We shouldn't close our doors because our companies, you take a PRWT, those companies want to compete at nationally. If you close our doors, they're going to get their doors closed to them. You can't, and we allow black financial advisors from all over the country to come in here and do our financing works with the city of Seabrook, Branford, and all of those firms are outside. So I think we've got to be very careful about foreclosing it to outsiders. And the last two things, given Philadelphia's changing racial and ethnic mix, multicultural personal and professional relationships are important. Absent relationships, race will continue to impede progress. City Council should establish forums to facilitate those relationships. And in closing, I am not critical of efforts to create access to capital, build black business skills, improve current spending numbers, and rewarding prepared businesses. But short-term winners, one-time infrastructure dollars, and good intentions without structural change will not transform the future and cannot be allowed to camouflage the essential need for change.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burrell.
So, may I just have something to say, just a few words, please, Councilman? So, Donna Alley, President, Team Clean. And I'd just like to talk about a few of the programs in my past that have worked. And it seems like we have kind of gotten away from this. And one of the programs, for lack of a better term, programs was the Pennsylvania Convention Center. You know, years ago, and George can probably tell you about this, you know, there was a protest to get, you know, when the convention center was built, they wanted black and brown workers there, wanted black and brown companies, and they did that. I was one of the firms that was selected, but as a subcontractor, went in as a subcontractor. But not only did they put us in as subcontractors and give us the work, the convention center board, and I guess what was called then the diversity board, met with us every quarter to make sure that we were succeeding in that particular contract. What could they do for us to, you know, generate more business? They took a look, every black contractor in there. It wasn't only about getting the contract, it was about keeping the contract. And then I'm just going to go back, and they say you shouldn't pine the past, but I am pining the past. When Marla was at OEO, I guess it was called the Minorities Business Development Council. But at the time, you know, when they put us black contractors in there, they gave us contracts, or, you know, we were able to get contracts with prime contractors. But Marla met with us whenever there was an issue, a problem with payment. You know, I remember back then the prime contractors didn't want me in there. They locked the door when there was night meetings, and do all kinds of terrible things so that, you know, my contract was at City Hall and I was cleaning City Hall. Most of the meetings were at night. They did all kinds of terrible things so that I wouldn't participate or feel comfortable in that particular contract. And so Marla would meet with me. Marla would meet with the majority, with the contractors, and let them know that this was not acceptable. So, you know, I'm just saying things like that, advocates for us, places that we can go. I mean, there are problems that I have had in all types of contracts over the past, I guess, like 5 to 6 years, but nowhere to go, nowhere to advocate. You know, and I'm a growing business, right? I'm not the startup, but we still have issues too. So, you know, I think one of the things is getting the contracts, but keeping us in there and ensuring that there's a path to growth for us would be also important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ali. And there is a question for Mr. Burrell by Councilman Maria Kiona Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to George, you know, I appreciate his consistent advocacy over the years. We all know, and I think Joanna touched on this, and folks have touched on this whole procurement process, and, you know, part of how people write up and exclude people in the writing up of procurement. But one of the challenges, you know, outside of the political will from up top, but one of the challenges we have faced with departments is, you know, we have the same contractors who bid for multiple departments, right? And one of the challenges that we have is when they are not meeting their goals, they are so far into their contract that the law department and others say it is not in our best interest to remove them from the contract. And I think Akil talked to this. When you were under the street administration, what tools that you use? Because I think until we remove people from contracts and show them that we're serious, we're not going to do this. What were some of the tools that you use when contractors didn't meet their goals? Because outside of removing them from the contract and hurting their pocket, the behavior is not going to change because they know they can get away with it. We have not disqualified. I think we've disqualified 3 contractors in the 14 years I've been in council. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think the failure in the street administration, I tell people this all the time, because I was responsible in the street administration for awarding contracts to people of color. And we did a very successful job of it. But the failure is we didn't change the process. So once I left, a process that does all of the things that you just described got back into play, and we've gotten what we've gotten since then.
at some point, Councilwoman, I think that's why I said and what I just said. I think you need to empower OEO. You need to expand their staff, and you need to give them power in the procurement process. And in the procurement process, you need to do what the state does, and that is they set a percentage participation requirement. And if you don't meet that percentage participation requirement, you are disqualified. You are thrown out of that bid process. What they also require is that once you are awarded, and they require that you name the subcontractors that are going to be awarded in your contract, and they identify what I've already said, identify specifically what is the work they're going to be given, what's the contract value, and what are the profit margins. And within 30 days after the award, and then all of that becomes a consideration, a specific consideration in the review process, so that you have percentages, 7% attached to it, 5% attached to it. So it becomes significant to prime contractors. It could be the percentage that makes the decision about whether they win or lose, where now we oftentimes let the prime contractors pick the subcontractors after they win. So it's irrelevant. And then once they've done that, they require the prime contractor who wins to deliver them a signed contract with black subcontractors for the work they said they're going to give them at the price they said they're going to give it to them with the profit margins. Because what happens, and I see Keith Bethel sitting over there in the corner, he knows this better than anybody. What often happens when prime contractors are awarded the contracts without and agreeing to meet the percentage goals and have told the prime contractors who they're going to contract with, they then go back to them and say, hey, I got it now. I was going to give you a contract for $2,000. Now I got one for you for $1,200. and the subcontractor is so happy to get not so happy, but and so you got to take those kind of things, and if you don't create a process for which there are both incentives to prime contractors and consequences for their failure to comply, they're just going to keep behaving the way they do. And so you have to do it, Councilwoman, on the front end. It's virtually impossible on the back end, except you get what you get, complaints, and try to fix things along the way.
No, I agree. I mean, when Rebecca Reinhardt was CAO, we spent a lot of time looking at this procurement, because one of my biggest frustrations is, we have the same major contractors, the streets department, water department, all these guys. And I have struggled to get the law department and the administration to say, if you're not meeting your requirement on one contract, you are no longer a qualified bidder, and we should exclude them, as you said, that the state is doing from the next bid process. But we have the same contractors misbehaving, and then they keep bidding on contracts from one department to the other and are not disqualified. And I'm like, if they're not meeting their goals at the streets department, what's going to make them meet their goals at the water department? Like, why are they still considered qualified bidders? So I agree with you, and Mr. Chair and the sponsor of this resolution, we should really have the state calm down and talk to us a little bit about legally how we can do that. One of my challenges is with these departments is they're halfway through their contract, and if they have to rebid it out, there has to be a way in the process where at some point we can disqualify someone, go to the next bidder quickly, so that these guys don't think they got us over the coals because they're so into the contract that we're not willing to walk away from them. And in government, because everything is so delayed, that becomes the excuse. For instance, in the Department of Recreation, when I got elected, I learned very quickly. One of the few contractors that got disqualified was from our district, because I started walking the construction site every week. And the contractor had 12 contracts, and he'd do the work to the jobs he wanted to, and then sit on the other stuff. And I think all of those practices, that goes back to staffing, accountability, and oversight. As a government, we don't do well, and so they hold us hostage. So I look forward to the chair of this conversation and of this resolution. We got to stop talking about this and really do something about it. It is shameful. It is shameful, the numbers that we have, and it is shame on us as Joanna said, it's 38 years later, we're still having the same conversation. There has to be penalties for this. And we know who the bad actors are. That's the sad part about it. And they end up on our list. They don't end up on my list as it relates to some of my departments, because I already crossed those out, right? And it's like, how is this person better than this person, or so forth? But it is a challenge to see it across the board with our department. So we appreciate all of your advocacy, to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I could just, I would just say one thing. I generally agree. The problem is procurement and project management. You don't necessarily want to lose good contractors, but they're going to do what you let them do. And the procurement department and the project manager are committed to them and let them get away with this. What they're doing is not unknown. They are not doing it undercover. They're not hiding it. They have been quietly permitted to do it. And if you don't bring your procurement people and bring your project man and understand that project managers are a part of this process. Because once the contract is awarded, it's the project managers who are giving them waivers and letting them take work away from minority contractors. And you've got to discipline that end of the spectrum.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from members of this panel? And thank you for your testimony. Next, I'm going to call for Mr. Kevin Bethel from Philadelphia Alliance. State your name for the record. Keith Bethel. I'm sorry, Keith. Keith Bethel.
That's his brother.
Oh, that's your brother for real?
No. You're on mute, Keith.
Keith, can you hear me?
Now, this is a tech guy, too.
You might still have your AirPods on, Keith.
He just took those out.
Yeah, but if you don't take them off Bluetooth, George, they'll still be on.
Uh-huh. You know, I don't know. You know, I don't know nothing about that.
Yeah.
You got 5 seconds, Keith. 5.
Keith, you want to log out? You want to log out and log back on?
You want to come over to my house? I think he just lied.
You log off or log
I'll try to come back. Right.
So, Sean, I'm going to ask this, Sean. Sean, can you call on the next panelist and we come back to keep things moving forward?
Yes, sir. The only other person that we have is Karen Bruggerman.
All right. Is that better, guys?
Oh, okay. Karen, give us a second. Keith Bethel is back on. Keith, are you really Kevin Bethel's brother?
I am Kevin's little brother, yes.
Oh, wow.
And you've used up half of your time, Keith.
That's my guy.
George Burrell. Anytime you go after George Burrell, I mean. And Joanne, if you get him to write a book, all he has to do is collect all those memos and put them into people back and we'd be done. So, Council Chair, Councilman Johnson, and City Council members, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am Keith Bethel. I'm the President and CEO of the Philadelphia. It's a newly formed not-for-profit that really looks at how do you bring together alliances, and this has been a very important topic with us. I submitted written testimony, but for time, I'll shorten this to say, really the focus of our work has been to look at broadly all the quasi-government and government agencies across the city of Philadelphia, and I think we all heard the problem. Across the city, there are systemic issues of racial barriers for Black and Brown individuals in the city. And our research with McKinsey, and I'm joined today by Karen Bergman, who's from the NOAC Metro Finance Lab at Drexel. Our research with McKinsey and the team at Drexel clearly identified there is significant opportunity for the advancing of Black and Brown businesses and to deal not just with Black poverty, but also to deal with the Black median household incomes in the city of Philadelphia. We very often talk about poverty. Poverty is a very low number. We have more than 40% of the people in Philadelphia, Black and Brown individuals, sit below the median household income of their white counterparts in the city. If we don't build both, and that's about building generational wealth and sustainable wages that are significantly higher than they are today.
So we spent we spent 6 months doing research with McKinsey on the minority business partnerships. We looked at 10 quasi-government and government agencies and discovered there was about $6.6 billion worth of opportunity that was addressable spend for minority participation. If you look at that, only 800 million of that was being spent with Black and brown and or women-owned businesses. And some of the largest businesses are outside of Philadelphia, female white-owned businesses outside of the city of Philadelphia. We think that that is misaligned with really the real goal and mission of advancing minority participation. And so when we finished that work with McKinsey, we met with several city council people, certainly the mayor's office, the Department of Commerce, to say, why would we not look at new ways to integrate the work across the quasi-government agencies? And should there be some shared form of a nerve center that creates transparency and consistent accountability that helps to deal with the 18 different barriers to entry that we saw for Black and brown individuals? And this included things that Don Ali, Malik Majid, people who lead significant companies in the city of Philadelphia helped us identify. Barriers of entry around certification. We talked a lot today about capital and capital access. Long before we get to capital access, we need to get to fair contracting opportunities and RFPs that are written in such a way that are transformative. The barriers of entry across multiple departments, multiple agencies limit public participation by individuals. And I worked at Aramark for 32 years. Big companies are dependent upon significant public sector spending. Public sector spending becomes an anchor to your revenue cash flow for any minority business. So when we start talking about building businesses, public sector spending becomes the anchor institution that allows you to manage all your back office and other expenses so you can go compete in the private sector. So we came forward with a recommendation. Should we consider some form of quasi-government agency or nerve center that really would include both state, federal, local elected officials, along with private sector financing and private sector leaders and civic leaders who would jointly work on ways to create transparency, leveraging things like technology to look consistently. No one today was able to give real reports. I think as close as we got was Ann Nevitz, who spent the past 2 years trying to get really good at this. But no one was really able to give you clear details on Black participation and Hispanic participation. And I think to be poor, Black, or female in Philadelphia, you can be Black, female, or Hispanic, and likely to be that. But we have to deal with the idea that 42% of our population is African American, and we sit significantly below any line or measure. We also would recommend that we would look at cities who have done this work well, like Los Angeles, Louisville, St. Louis. People were starting to do the work of putting together collaborative teams. And George Burrell will tell you, no city is really doing this well. But what I would say is there are cities who have a firmer grip on pulling together the alliances and the transparency necessary to create a better future. We should do this better than everyone else, but we should follow people who are doing those types of leads, like Charlotte, where you see Duke Energy leading in the process with the mayor's office. You create a significant access to capital fund. That's where we see the future says, could you create some form of nerve center that collaborates and pulls all those teams together and really start to try to address in a common way significant barriers to entry for Black and brown individuals across our city and economic development. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you for questions. We did provide a deck to the chair, and hopefully that deck is one that everyone gets a chance to see. I do think there's robust information there. We share that certainly with many city council people one-on-one with the mayor's office and Commerce. And Karen and I will be available for questions.
Thank you very much, Keith. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Keith, I have a question. Give me an overview. In your presentation, you talked about 18 obstacles.
Yeah, there are 18 significant obstacles. Mm-hmm. And we break those down into 3 big categories. So the 3 categories, one, and Karen, feel free to chime in. One of the biggest issues is looking at what the entrepreneurs themselves face. Certification, that you have multiple certification pathways in the city of Philadelphia. Could we get to a simplified common certification that allows you to qualify? And there still may be specific federal and state requirements when you think about the airport and other places. But within the city of Philadelphia, the school board has $1.2 billion in capital it's going to deploy over the next 5 years. We should have one common certification process. So looking at things like that, certification and barriers to entry for the minority, for the individual, for the minority firms. The other one were barriers when the RFP process itself in purchasing and RFP is we issued RFPs that have more detailed accountability. And I think George brought this up. More transparency in the RFP process would make it easier for minority participants to be not just primed, but well vetted and well performing subcontractors. I think I've got a big echo, so hopefully you all hear me.
No, everything is perfect on this.
All right. On that subcontractor platform, for example, if our subcontract RFP processes included things like awards for joint venture effort, access to capital, and actually being in the room for the presentation and contracting process, it eliminates some of the things that we often see, and George did a great job of explaining how subcontractors get pushed behind. By changing both city ordinance and RFP processes across the spectrum, then we actually are transformative, because long after we all leave these roles, we will see that the RFPs are anchored in new process and policy. I think the last one was thinking about economic development and real financial barriers to entry. So how do you create joint venture, capital access? When we talk about capital access, I spent 32 years at a Fortune 200 company. We could create any type of capital access we want because we had capital and we wanted minority participants. We didn't have to worry about capital. We can create accountabilities in the private sector. So I love that we make pledges, but pledges need dollars. And those dollars need to be able to be accessible to minority firms. We need to target minority firms for growth. In my opinion, systemic racism was a collaborative effort, and so does the unwinding of the impact. And so we need to figure out real new ways to be collaborative. And I think the private sector has much more freedom. So when you do that in partnership with the public sector, I think we get really big rewards. Karen, you want to add anything to the idea around the 18 big categories we identified?
No, I think you covered it. I think a lot of the pain points that the research encapsulated, people have already discussed today, but the deck that we sent does a good job grouping them by category and kind of cataloging the same types of obstacles for lack of financing, legalistic RFP language, and legal and constitutional restrictions on goal setting across different agencies. So I think Keith really captured it, but it's a nice cataloging of all the different challenges that have been discussed today.
Can I provide one more example? A great example is that $1.2 billion that you have in the school ordinance itself will limit the ability, because of the bonding requirements, for any Black or brown firm to participate in much of the building of the Philadelphia Public School District. How can we have a school district where 88% of the people are African American? You can't have a single Black mom or dad build a building. There's something fundamentally wrong with
that. Keith, thank you very much for your insight and your recommendations. Very informative. I'm going to call on Maria Quiñones Sanchez, council member, who has a question.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, let's make sure that all of us get the deck. I'm not part of this committee, so I want to make sure I get the deck. Keith, I appreciate it. You're not the little brother. I know you're saying that affectionately, but you're your own person. Although both of you are really good guys, your family must be really proud of you. I had a question because this whole certification piece has become a challenge for many of the businesses that we all know. We've heard the stories about, the wife who's now the prime, but it's her husband's firm and all this other stuff. Government made a decision, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, not to be in the certification business. How do we create a certification process if it's not government or otherwise to facilitate this? Because whether, people have to wait on the SEPTA line or they have to go to Jersey and do the reciprocity, how do we clean up that certification process that's become a bottleneck?
I think one of the things you do is you leverage. So Philadelphia has the benefit of having great practitioners. One of the things you should do is leverage those practitioners. People like Della Clark and Jeff Ornstein, who are actually touching and spending time with the businesses. They could become a great certification agency that we would utilize. And places like Chicago and others do this work, right? Where they have a recognized certification agency within the city of Philadelphia, within the city. I think that's where the opportunity exists, and you could create transparency around it. I also think transparency around who people are, right? When someone is a newly appointed female head of a partnership arrangement, we should just identify that so that you're clear, city council and others are clear around the types of purchasing that are being made. And you can create levels of accountability around all of those things. But I would say leveraging the practitioners who are here is a great way to create a certification avenue.
I have a question around procurement, because that's a whole big issue. And again, that really depends on political will and how, we dictate to departments fairness. Did you find in your work at Aramark and other places that some of the scoring that you're alluding to, giving people points for attending the session, giving people points on how their capital stack is, giving people points for their partnership, was any of that stuff legally ever challenged? You know, some of the arguments sometimes we hear when we're having these procurement discussions and project management, which, by the way, we don't have solid project management in the city. That's why all of these people get away with what they do. Were any of those procurement reforms ever legally challenged because they may have been looked at as affirmative action goals? If we said, you know, I know we have a local business one, but every time we talk about race or marginalized communities, the legal debate is, you know, you can't do it. Can you speak to that?
I don't know, Karen, you may be able to weigh in. I don't know that we saw specific legal challenges. We did see legal barriers, that we saw legislation and or policy at the state or local level that did create a barrier. I don't know, and we may have seen at the state level clearly legal challenges, but I don't know that we saw or recorded specific legal challenges other than we recorded barriers to entry because of legal issues. Karen, did we see any specific legal challenges?
No, and I can't speak to the experience at Aramark. I know the private sector generally has much more flexibility in what they do to innovate around these programs. And, you know, I think realizing as people pursue change that different entities report upwards to different federal agencies that have different legal standards. So SEPTA gets money from DOT and so does the airport, and they're complying with their standards versus the school district. You know, the $1.2 billion in flexible money that they got through ARPA, that money came from the U.S. Department of Education, which I don't believe has any requirements around DBE or MBE spending because they don't typically give money like that to school districts at a local level. So realizing the different kind of constraints or different environments that all these different entities are working with impacts the type of legal challenge that they could get depending on how they spend their money. I think one thing with the research we did was simply realizing the different layers of complexity. And, you know, Keith has that complexity is what's leading us to advocate for more resources, more capacity around helping not only businesses, but also the procuring offices navigate all of this.
Now, lastly, what, you know, because one of the big issues is like, how do we grow these companies, and capacity has to do also with how we debundle. Any recommendations that you saw around debundling of some of these big contracts to create those opportunities that we should be aware of?
I don't know that we saw specific debundling efforts. I do think we saw opportunities. So one of the opportunities would be, how do you leverage PIDC for minority participation when you have specific rules, but by funneling dollars, you could see different functions. So example is, we proposed something with PIDC around school buildings, because if those projects flow to PIDC, PIDC has more freedom in how they might use those capital dollars and help to allocate and do minority participation in that way. So that's where we saw the opportunity of maybe leveraging other entities.
So you saw PIDC again, and you know, I think we should all speak around the challenges. This 4-part bidding creates a total disadvantage right at the school district, and turnkey projects at the school district have become more efficient, more effective, and allow the school district to have more flexibility. Are you saying, because one of my concerns with some of these discussions, and I know they're happening, is we're still bypassing the problem. 4-part contracting,
and that's where I do want to, right. So I want to say this, I think, and George raises this point often, talking about these short-term things we do is vital because the dollars are flowing. So what I can't do is miss the opportunity that you have billions of dollars flowing into the city by infrastructure, ARP, and access to capital. But while you're doing that, we shouldn't take our eye off the long-term things, like you need to change the process at Harrisburg. We need to change 4-part. That work needs to be done also. But I think that's going to require, I think, Councilwoman, more effort than the more immediate things that we could do. So I think we've got to dribble with both hands. Nail the short term while we continue to not take our eye off the long-term initiatives that are there.
No, I agree with you, but I think, you know, we have to call the discriminatory, racist, structural problems. We got to call them out, because when we, you know, and I did one of the first turnkey projects in my district and got a lot of pushback around it, even though we had, you know, the first LEED certified school building, more efficiency, like, you know, build 21st century learning opportunities. I think we got to call that stuff out so that we can, right, in the interim, create these other opportunities, but not talking about those structural issues, because the state has its rules and the feds have their rules, and they're not congruent. You know, we all know the building trades have certain rules at the state that are not required at the federal level, that then they want local municipalities like Philadelphia to follow, that we don't have to follow. But again, no one has the political will to say we don't have to do it that way.
And that's why I do think something outside of city government that does have resources, right? So nursing that does have resources to challenge at Harrisburg and other places to advocate on behalf of minority business development, because you do need to deal with school code. You need to deal with other things. And so we look at both. I mean, that's why I do think that the debundling is around taking apart some of the issues, the systemic issues I said, either inside of procurement and other places. I think that big companies, one of the things with big companies, if you write the RFP in such a way, big companies will respond and minority businesses will grow, and they'll grow in big, fair partnerships if you write the RFP in such a way to make the firm accountable.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. That's Sean. Any other panelists? Any people for comment?
No, sir. That's the last person that we have scheduled, but I do see that someone has their hand raised with a question.
Yes, they can go ahead and speak.
Miss McNamara?
No, nothing for me. Thanks.
Okay, then that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Well, one, I want to take a moment and thank all of my colleagues, including Councilwoman Maria Keone Sanchez. She's not even a part of the committee, for joining us. It's very, very important discussion. I know we work on a lot of issues here in the city of Philadelphia. I'm a strong advocate around the issue of gun violence, but I also recognize that the inequality, right, and making sure that Black and brown people are having an opportunity to build generational wealth, currently right now in this city is an injustice. And so I know that the root causes of the gun violence that I am seeing is a lack of opportunity. And if people don't have opportunities, then we will see the continuous sense of gun violence that we're seeing day in and day out. And so I thank all the panelists for taking time out of their schedule to adding to this discussion. I know we're going to have a follow-up part 2 as well. But most importantly, George talked about, as well as Joanne talked about, and y'all are two individuals I highly respect that have been around, right, and really using your expertise right now to make sure that this generation gets it right, because we shouldn't be going 10, 20, 30 years later still talking about the same issues over and over and over and over. And at the end of the day, it does take political will. It does take some sacrificing in terms of speaking truth for power, and in some cases not even being, being unpopular. Because at the end of the day, if you're going along and getting along, you're never going to get anything done. And with that change comes with, stepping up and really making people feel uncomfortable about how we need to change. Other than that, you'll continuously seeing the same thing day in and day out. And so I just thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule. I know Ms. Donna, you've been around for a while and fighting the good fight, but we need 10 Donnas. We need 10, 20 team cleans here in the city of Philadelphia. Another 30, 40 PRWTs, right? And that has to be the mentality in terms of how we operate. We probably have more African-American elected officials in city council. On a state level, we got a congressperson as well. And we probably control just about every major government elected, particularly position that the city of Philadelphia has to offer. So we must do better. And so I thank everybody for taking time out of your schedule and joining this dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. Also commend you for the work that you've been doing in reference to our conversation with Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. And also, too often in the city we talk in silos, and you realize that there's a need to connect the two. So although you've done a lot of work in a public safety space, going back from a personal perspective all the way through now, but also making that connection to the issue that the gun violence and economic development are intertwined. And so you've constantly been making that connection. And I want to thank you for doing that because of the work that you do as chair of Transportation and Public Utilities, and seeing that if we don't have advancement in contracting opportunities, we're not going to have advancement in reducing gun violence. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Derek, always for being my wingman and addressing the issue with me with the Chamber of Commerce as well. Thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Scroll is still in a meeting. Would you mind if you could
Yes.
closing out the hearing?
Yes. This meeting is adjourned to the call of the chair. If there are no more comments from anyone else, thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you all.
welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Afternoon.